The BLEACH anime returned in 2022 after a decade of being off air, and across 3 cours, which consist of 40 episodes, the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime has totally exceeded all of our expectations. We finally had Yamamoto's Bankai animated in full, the truth behind Ichigo's heritage, Senjimaru's Bankai, which was storyboarded by Kubo himself for the anime, and over 180 chapters of manga content that have been adapted with so many anime exclusive editions that even fans who had read the manga had no idea what was going to happen next. With Cour 4 titled The Calamity premiering in July, which is just around the corner, now it's time to look back at everything that has happened across all of the 3 cours. I'll be talking about every major fight, all of the anime original editions, every structural change and rearrangement that the anime staff has made in order to improve upon the source material. This is a definitive recap of the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime from episode 1 all the way through to episode 40. This will be followed by a full breakdown of every confirmed manga event and prediction for Cour 4. This is perfect if you need a refresher before the final season airs. But you know who's prepared for the final season of the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime? These are the individuals that are subscribed to the channel. Only 20% of the people who watch these videos are subscribed, so if you enjoy my BLEACH content, hit the bell notification and the subscribe button for even more videos just like this. Now, we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's just get straight into it. The Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime aired in October of 2022, and the very first episode had a single job, which was to prove that this wasn't going to be a nostalgic cash grab. It needed to show everyone that BLEACH was truly back with intent. Episode 1 wastes little time as it sets a tone that's totally different from anything that the original anime ever gave us. Director Tomihisa Taguchi establishes his visual signature almost immediately with his aggressive color grading, exaggerated lighting, a cinematic weight to every scene that the older BLEACH episodes just simply didn't have. You see it best during Ichigo's battle against Eben towards the end of the episode. The sun is setting over Karakura Town and the entire frame is drowning in red. When it cuts to the Quincy, blue dominates. Taguchi is visually coding the 2 factions from the very beginning, and it's such a confident artistic choice for the opening episode of a returning huge shonen series. Episode 1 doesn't start here as it begins with a mystery. Entire villages in Rukongai have been disappearing without a trace. Ikaku and Yumichika are out investigating one such village as they see footprints in the dirt that converge and just stop. There's no signs of struggle or bodies anywhere. The residents had seemingly just disappeared out of thin air. Mayuri is monitoring the situation from the Shinigami's Research and Development Institute with zones across the Rukongai marked as clear, but nobody has answers, and the unresolved tension sits underneath everything else that happens in this episode. Meanwhile, Ichigo is living his life in Karakura Town. We see then Ryunosuke Yuki and Shino Madarame, the 2 Shinigami stationed within Karakura Town, and the anime actually adds some new content here. As we see Yuki being chased across rooftops by a hollow, Shino gets overwhelmed. Uryu snipes with a holy arrow to save Shino as Chad grabs her out of thin air. Orihime heals Yuki, and it's a great way to remind us of what Ichigo's friends are capable of before the real threats show up. And it doesn't take long before the real threat does appear as Eben crashes through Ichigo's window. He lands on his bed, refusing to get off, and Ichigo kicks him in the face so hard that he flies out of the window. Once the fight starts, things get weird fast, as Eben appears to look like an Arrancar. He's got a mask fragment on his face, and he's pulling out a Quincy cross and forming reishi cannons. Ichigo clocks this immediately and identifies it as identical to Uryu's. Their fight takes them across Karakura Town and underneath a bridge, with the anime giving the whole sequence far more movement than the manga did, and it's during this sequence that Eben's true objective becomes clear. He's been goading Ichigo to use his Bankai this entire time, and when Ichigo finally obliges and activates Tensar Zangetsu, Eben whips out a medallion. Now this device releases beams of light and it forms a massive X in the sky. The left arm of Ichigo's Bankai long coat begins to crack apart. Here's where the anime does something incredible with the pacing. While Eben is attempting to steal Ichigo's Bankai in Karakura Town, the episode intercuts with Yamamoto's office in the Serite, 7 masked individuals have infiltrated the 1st Division barracks. A Shinigami attempting to report to the head captain gets beheaded. Luda's Freegun declares war on behalf of the Vandenreich, and Chojuro Sasakibe, Yamamoto's lieutenant, the man who had served him for over 1,000 years, is impaled by a huge holy arrow and pinned to the wall. Sasakibe's dying words to Yamamoto are synced with Ichigo breaking through Iben's medallion. Sasakibe tells Yamamoto that the enemy can do something to their Bankai, and at the exact same moment, Ichigo shatters the beams of light and blasts Iben with a Getsuga Tensho. The medallion didn't work. Ichigo's Bankai isn't able to be stolen. The anime is threading these two scenes together to create this rhythm of dread and defiance at the same time, and it hits different when you realize the implications. The Vandenreich are able to steal Bankai, but they are unable to steal Ichigo's, and nobody understands why yet. Iben escapes via a shadow, and it's to be noted that this black portal is clearly not a Garganta. The episode closes back in Silburn, where Yuhobak severs Luda's arm for arguing in his presence. The literal first scene with Yuhobak, and he's already cutting off the limbs of his subordinates. The Quincy War against the Shinigami has been declared as Sasakibe is dying, and Bleach is back with movie quality production and a much darker edge than the original 2004 anime, as the first episode titled The Blood Warfare ends. Episode 2, Foundation Stones, features the all-new opening and ending songs for the first time. We get Scar by Tatsuya Kitani, accompanied by those gorgeous pink-tinted visuals, and the ending song Saihate by Senna Rin. The episode begins in Silburn as Yuhobak continues his ruthless display of authority. Ludes is giving his report while lying in a pool of his own blood, and Yuhobak casually mentions that Ludes doesn't need his legs either if he's not going to sit up. The man forces himself upright to avoid disrespect, and then Iben, who had failed to steal Ichigo's Bankai, meets his end, with Yuhobak destroying his head entirely. The anime actually makes the death more brutal than the manga depicted it to be. Back in the world of the living, Nell shows up at Kurosaki Clinic, and the news that she brings shifts everything, as Hueco Mundo has been conquered by the Vandenreich. One of the biggest highlights from this episode is something that manga readers never got to see, and it's an actual fight sequence between Yuhobak and Tia Haribel, the former 3rd ranking Espada and the current ruler of Hueco Mundo. We see how she was captured, how the Quincy overwhelmed her territory, and it gives real weight to the threat. The Quincy didn't just invade the Soul Society, they took Hueco Mundo first. Ichigo, Chad, Orihime, and the others head through a Garganta to Hueco Mundo courtesy of Urohara. They arrive to find total devastation as there are mutilated Arrancar bodies. We see the Quincy hunting army escorting survivors like prisoners. The Tres Bestias, Apache, Milaros, and Sung Sung are seen to be fighting Kilgay Oppi, the Sternritter designated with the letter J, as he is the head of the hunting army. We quickly learn that Kilgay is a sadistic, methodical commander who executes his own subordinates without hesitation when they request retreat. There are 2 cuts from this episode that bothered a lot of fans. The first was Byakuya's eulogy during Sasakibe's funeral. In the manga, he delivers a more detailed speech about Sasakibe's dedication, but the anime trims this considerably. The second was Hashwald not elaborating upon why Iben's medallion failed to seal Ichigo's Bankai, which is a piece of information that would have been useful for the audience at this point, but the anime continues its approach of reserving critical information for later, removing comedic moments, and maintaining a serious tone overall. And I think it achieves this to great success, as Sasakibe's funeral is handled with real gravity, despite the cuts from Byakuya's dialogue. Episode 3, March of the Starcross, adapts 6 chapters into its 20-minute runtime. This is a truly aggressive pace, and you can feel it. The battle between Ichigo and Kilgay continues in Hueco Mundo, and we get a significant anime exclusive edition. These are scenes between Uryu and Ryuken, where Uryu begins learning about Quincy history through his grandfather Soken Ishida's notebook. This is huge for Uryu's character, and it plants seeds that the anime will keep cultivating across all of the 3 cores that we've seen so far. The Ichigo vs Kilgay fight itself drew some complaints from viewers. The animation lacked the fluidity that the first 2 episodes had established. The recycled shots and stiff sequences cropping up during the action. It's fair fair to assume the production team was saving their best work for the fights that they absolutely could not afford to get wrong, like Yamamoto vs Yhwach, Kenpachi vs Unohana, but it was still disappointing to see this early on. Thankfully, a lot of these things were corrected when the Blu-ray for Cour 1 was released. So Killgate activates his Volstandig holy form as he becomes a far more dangerous opponent. This is the first time that we see a Sternritter go all out, and it's clear that Killgate at full power is a tier above what Ichigo was expecting. The Tres Bestias, who were talking trash and dominating the hunting army moments ago, get instantly wiped out. Killgate absorbs Ion, the Chimera Hollow that the Tres Bestias summon by sacrificing parts of their own bodies, and the power boost makes him even more unstable, as Ichigo has to step in directly now. Meanwhile, Mayuri's conversation with Yamamoto about the disappearing Rukongai districts gets anime additional dialogue. Mayuri explains the consequences of Quincy eliminating large numbers of hollows, the balance between souls in the different realms gets disrupted, and the sacrifice of some Rukongai citizens is an acceptable cost if it stabilizes the worlds. It's cold and calculating, and it's completely in character for Mayuri. The episode wraps up with the Quincy beginning their first proper invasion of the Soul Society, with Basby decimating the 3rd Division. It's a whirlwind of an episode that throws us from Hueco Mundo to the Serete and back again, and it marks the first time that we see Rukia and Renji in the new anime. There's a notable rearrangement of manga content here. In the manga, Yhwach learns about Ichigo fighting Killgate as he orders the invasion of the Soul Society, but in the anime this scene gets repositioned to after Killgate activates his holy form. The manga also includes an earpiece scene where Killgate receives intel from Yhwach, but since the anime reorganizes the timing of Yhwach's decision to invade, this no longer fits, so it gets cut from the anime. It's one of many structural tweaks that the anime staff makes to improve the flow of events. Episode 4, Kill the Shadow, is where the Quincy Blood War truly begins. The Soul Society's Research and Development Institute is tracking the invasion in real time, and the numbers are horrifying to say the least. 16 powerful Quincy have bypassed the protective membrane and materialized within massive reishi crosses across the Serete. Over 1,000 Shinigami are dead within the first 7 minutes, as the 3rd Division Lieutenant Izurukira is among the casualties. Akon looks at the data and flatly declares that the Gote 13 cannot win. Hashward then approaches the Blue Stream Gate and encounters Kajomaru. The conversation between them is really chilling, as Hashward tells Kajomaru and his men that they can run if they want, because killing them wouldn't even send a message. When Kajomaru rushes at him in anger, Hashward cuts him in half vertically with a single strike as the war begins. The episode also throws in about 2 minutes of new footage where we see the captains using their Shikai against the Sternritter: Soifon, Hitsugaya, Komamura, and Byakuya. They are all engaging with their designated opponents, and these brief clashes establish that the captains can hold their own with Shikai. The problem is when they realize that Shikai isn't enough, and they have no choice but to activate Bankai. Now this is when the Quincy medallions return, as 4 captains lose their Bankai in rapid succession. Hitsugaya's Daiguren Hyorinmaru is stolen by Kangdu, Soifon's Jakuho Raikoben is taken by BG9, Byakuya's Senbonzakura Kageyoshi is seized by Aznod, and lastly Komamura's Kokujo Tengen Myo is taken by Bambietta. The voice actors for the Sternritter are incredible here, as Bambietta's in particular was a standout during this episode. The raw panic as captain after captain realizes that their powerful weapon has been ripped away from them is executed perfectly. Meanwhile, back in Hueco Mundo, Killgate fires his prison technique, the jail, at Ichigo through the Garganta and traps him inside a cage of reishi. Killgate laughs and tells Ichigo he has to sit there and wait while the Soul Society falls. Gradually, it begins to dawn on us just how perfectly the Vandenreich planned every single aspect of this invasion. Ichigo's in prison, the captains are unable to use their Bankai, the body count is already in the thousands. There is so much happening at once and you can barely take all of it in. Episode 5, Wrath as a Lightning, adapts 6 chapters of manga material into one of the best paced episodes of the first Cour. Now this is where things get really personal, as we hear Rin broadcast across the Serete that Ichigo is on his way and his Bankai can't be stolen. Captains and lieutenants who had been losing hope suddenly get a jolt of energy. Hitsugaya tells Rangiku that they can't let themselves be defeated. Komamura rouses his subordinates to stand because it would be disgraceful to lie down while Yamamoto fights. Shunsui readies Katen Kyokotsu and charges towards Robert Akutron, and there's this wave of defiance rolling through the Serete. But Ichigo's Reiatsu vanishes within the Garganta as he's been trapped by Kilge's jail, as the Shinigami Research and Development Institute loses contact entirely with Ichigo. Akon scrambles to try and reconnect while Jidambo attacks the Research and Development Institute as he's controlled by Pepe Wakabrada's love ability. Ichigo is stuck listening to the screams of the dying Shinigami as he's hammering at the cage with Getsuga Tensho after Getsuga Tensho. Byakuya's defeat is merciless within this episode. Asnod redirects Byakuya's own stolen Semonzakura Kageyoshi petals against him. The blade petals slash Byakuya across his entire body, slamming him into a wall, and when he tries to get back up, Asnod just does it again and again. Renji attempts to activate his Bankai to intervene, but Maskedy Masculine grabs Zabimaru by the blade and dropkicks Renji through several buildings. We also get a new scene here showing that Rukia was beaten by Meninas during the invasion, and then Byakuya is seen defeated, broken, with his Zanpakuto shattering. He tells Rukia and Renji to forgive him, and the way that the anime depicts all of this is truly devastating. My absolute favorite moment from this episode is Yamamoto's revenge for Sasakibe. Driscoll Bursey, the Sternritter who had killed Sasakibe, activates his stolen Bankai Koko Gonryo Rikyu. He starts blasting Yamamoto with lightning as he's bragging about killing a lieutenant, laughing about how he'll use Sasakibe's own power to finish the head captain now. This is where the production team threw in an original flashback that is genuinely one of the best additions in the early portions of the core. We see a young Sasakibe approach Yamamoto and declare his intention to become the head captain's right-hand man. Yamamoto tells him that he should become a student first, but Sasakibe refuses, as a student can only copy Yamamoto, but someone standing beside him can cover every gap that the head captain leaves open. And then Sasakibe reveals that he's acquired a Bankai, as Yamamoto challenges him to use it. In the Ryugon district of Rukongai, Sasakibe activates Koko Gonryo Rikyu as he then charges at Yamamoto. The subsequent attack carves a permanent scar into Yamamoto's forehead. This is the second one that he receives, and it's intersecting with the first one already on his head. It forms a cross-shaped mark as it leads people to start calling Yamamoto Jujisai because the shape resembled the character Ju. But Sasakibe refused to use that name because he didn't want his actions changing who Yamamoto was. So Yamamoto spotted a willow tree in a nearby garden and he chose the name Genryusai instead for himself, as he took on this name for Sasakibe's sake. Sasakibe spent his entire life honing this Bankai for Yamamoto's sake in return. Kubo always prefers to show rather than tell, and the anime staff stayed faithful to this philosophy, rather than having Byakuya's monologue about why Sasakibe was a legend, which is what the manga did. The anime shows us Sasakibe's legacy through action. It's more powerful, emotional, and more in line with how Bleach is written. Yamamoto walks through Driscoll's stolen lightning attack and tells him that Sasakibe's Bankai hit way harder than this. He releases Ryujin Jaka and burns Driscoll alive where he is stood. Every inch of flesh is scorched off until nothing but bone is left standing. And even then, the bones crumble to dust seconds later as Yamamoto bids Sasakibe farewell and launches across the Serete like a comet as he heads to confront the leader of the Quincy army, Yuhobak himself. The episode's post-credit scene adapts Yuhobak holding a defeated Kinpachi Zaraki by the throat. He identifies Kinpachi as a special war power, and he's now taken him out and dismisses him. Yamamoto arrives and announces that he has come to annihilate Yuhobak as the stage is now set. Episode 6, The Fire, is iconic, as even to this day it's regarded as the best episode from across the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime. Kubo himself stated before the anime aired that he was looking forward to everyone witnessing Yamamoto vs Yuhobak for themselves. After seeing episode 6, we all understood why. This is one of the greatest pieces of Bleach animation that will ever exist, hands down. Yamamoto rescues Kinpachi from Yuhobak's grip using Shumpo, as it's so fast that Yuhobak can't even react. He sets Kinpachi down and calmly announces that it has been 1,000 years. 3 Sternritter, Aznod, Basby, and Nanana drop in to assist their leader, and Yamamoto obliterates them with a single explosion of flame. The other captains on the battlefield collectively smirk when they feel the blast of Reiatsu. This man is operating at a level that makes the Sternritter look like insects. Then comes Yamamoto activating his Bankai Zankai no Tachi. Every droplet of water within the Soul Society begins evaporating. The wings of Kangdu's stolen Daiguren Hyorin Maru start melting. Shunsui and Ukitake recognize what's happening immediately. The anime's depiction of Zankai no Tachi is extraordinary. Taguchi's direction takes us from a fiery hellscape to a scorching desert-like atmosphere as the flames concentrate into the blade. Zankai no Tachi East focuses all of Yamamoto's fire into the tip of his blade, erasing anything that it touches without a trace. A single strike carves through buildings and terrain like they were never there. Zankai no Tachi West clads Yamamoto's body in flames that reach 15 million degrees Celsius. Hashward realizes the flames aren't real fire. They are in fact the Reiatsu of Yamamoto that has taken on the appearance of visible flames. This is how overwhelmingly powerful he is. Zankai no Tachi South summons the ashes of every person that's been killed by Yamamoto's Zanpakuto, animating them as skeletons that pursue his target. There's a brilliant new detail here where Royd, who is disguised as Yuhobak, stumbles through the horde and recognizes the faces of his own fallen comrades, like Zidritz, Hubert, and Algora among the dead. The psychological horror of being chased by the corpses of your subordinates is something that the manga couldn't fully convey, but the anime nails here perfectly. Lastly, we have Zankai no Tachi North, which is a single concentrated slash that obliterates everything. Yamamoto finishes the battle and his opponent collapses. As far as the head captain knows, he's just cut down the man who destroyed the Soul Society 1,000 years ago. But we're about to find out just how orchestrated this entire battle was. We also get the full conversation between Aizen and Yuhobak within Muken for the very first time here. In the manga, Yuhobak simply tells Yamamoto that Aizen refused his offer. But here we see the actual exchange. Aizen tells Yuhobak that it's shameful for the Quincy Emperor to be following in his footsteps, and Yuhobak notes that it would take too long to kill or subdue Aizen because of the Hogyoku within him. Seeing Aizen talk down to the main villain of the arc while chained up in prison is peak Aizen. Alongside all of this, Uryu is reading the Journal of Soken Ishida within Karakura Town and learning about the Quincy extermination from over 1,000 years ago. As he sees a drawing of a young Yamamoto. The anime does a great job of weaving in these anime-exclusive Uryu scenes into the action occurring in the Serete. A lot of us had to watch this episode twice, honestly, just to fully digest everything that was going on. Episode 7, Born in the Dark, begins with an anime-exclusive flashback that nobody had seen coming. The original Gotei 13 is seen in action for the very first time. Kubo did release a full-color manga spread of the original captains just before this episode aired, and the anime then suddenly brought them to life. These bloodthirsty killers that Yuhobak himself respected, led by a Yamamoto who was described as a demon with a sword who would use anything and everything to win. We see the original captain slaughtering Yuhobak's Quincy army 1,000 years ago. Sasakibe rises from the corpses behind Yuhobak and stabs him in the back with Gon Ryomaru. This gives Yamamoto the opening to deliver the finishing blow. It's a beautiful payoff to the Sasakibe flashback from episode 5, and it adds enormous weight to Yamamoto's fury throughout episodes 5 and 6. Then comes the fall as the real Yuhobak steps forward in the present day and we learn the truth. The man Yamamoto just spent his Bankai fighting was in fact Royd Lloyd, one of the twin Sternritter who can perfectly copy another person's appearance and memories. The real Yuhobak then cuts down the head captain with a single diagonal stroke, splitting him in half. Yamamoto's upper body hits the ground as the leader and founder of the Gotei 13 is now dead. Yuhobak delivers a monologue about how the Gotei 13 was once a gang of murderers, but now during times of peace they had found things to love and protect, and this softened them and thus made them hesitate when drawing their Zanpakuto. He declares that the Gotei 13 died with the Quincy 1,000 years ago. Yuhobak raises his finger and fires an attack. It's a huge barrage that wipes Yamamoto's remains off the face of the Soul Society. The captains across the Serete can feel it happen, as Shinji, Hitsugaya, Soifon and Komamura, all of the surviving captains sense the moment that their leaders erased from existence. The Soldat are then summoned as they begin destroying the remaining Shinigami forces. The scenes are brutal, with Shinigami getting cut down, impaled, and shot from every direction. Basbi stomps a wounded Shinigami skull into the pavement, while the Soldat pour past him. The Serete is burning and collapsing around Yhwach as he declares that it is finished. Ichigo then finally breaks through the jail in a fury and is guided to the Serete through a side aperture that Akon managed to establish. A bloodied Akon apologizes for not getting him through sooner. Ichigo arrives and hurls his broken Tensei Zangetsu from the sky, embedding it in the ground at Yhwach's feet before landing and picking it up. The fight here is ferocious as Ichigo and Yhwach clash across the rubble, exchanging blows at blinding speed, but Yhwach's clearly in control. He catches Ichigo's sword arm and pins his face into the dirt and drives his Reishi sword straight at Ichigo's throat. The blade stops as we see Blut Veen, a Quincy blood defense, surface across Ichigo's skin without him even trying. Yhwach sees this and smiles. Hashward cuts Ichigo's Tensei Zangetsu in half as the blade flies into the rubble. Yhwach bids Ichigo farewell and calls him his son born in the dark. The Vandenreich then retreat through these shadows, and the first Quincy invasion is over as the Soul Society is left in ruins. Episode 8, The Shooting Star Project Zero Mix, dives into the aftermath after the invasion. Rain pours across the rubble of the Serete as we see critical patients being sent to the 4th Division barracks. Isane asks Unohana if it was right for them to stay in the barracks while the Shinigami were dying on the front lines, but Unohana shuts down her concerns. Yamamoto's final order was for the 4th Division to remain in their barracks no matter what, and she reminds Isane not to let emotions override her judgment. We see Ikaku screaming at the nurses for telling him that Kinpachi was defeated. It's a pretty raw moment, as he refuses to believe what's happened. Rukia and Renji are out of surgery, heavily bandaged and barely conscious, as Ichigo visits them and Rukia thanks him for coming to protect the Soul Society, but he admits that he couldn't do anything. Shunsui stands in front of the massive crater where Yamamoto's body was. What's left of the head captain Zanpakuto is all that remains, as the surviving captains stand around it in silence. Mayuri examines Ichigo's broken Tensei Zangetsu as he determines that it cannot be repaired through conventional means. And then the Royal Guard descend. These are 5 of the most special Shinigami who protect the Soul King in the Royal Palace, each of whom have been promoted from the Gotei 13 for contributing something essential to the Soul Society. We meet Ichibei, the leader, Tenjiro Korinji, the Hot Springs healer, Kiryu Hikifune, the food specialist, Senjumaru Shutara, the textile master, and Uetsu Nimaya, the creator of the Zanpakuto. The anime gives a great moment to Soifon here, as she's furious at the Royal Guard for staying in the sky during the invasion as she attempts to strike Ichibei, only for Korinji to appear behind her with Shumpo so fast that she didn't even register his movement. He grabs her fist and tells her that the Gotei 13 are the ones tasked with protecting the Serete, not the Royal Guard, basically stating, "You failed your job, don't blame us for not doing it for you," and Soifon has no comeback to this. Senjumaru reveals that she's already collected Rukia, Renji, and Byakuya, as well as the broken Tensei Zangetsu, as we see them in large capsules. Unohana refuses to allow them to be taken until she verifies that they won't die. But Korinji silences her after he asks her if she's been using the healing techniques he taught her effectively. The tension between the Zero Division and the Gotei 13 captains is amazing. Ichibei identifies Ichigo specifically as the person that the Soul King once brought to the Royal Palace. The rebuilding of the Gotei 13 starts with him. The Royal Guard take Ichigo, Renji, Rukia, and Byakuya to the Royal Palace as their training begins. Episode 9, titled The Drop, is the slowest paced episode of the first Cour, and to be honest, it's better for it, as about only 3.5 chapters are adapted and every scene here has a lot of room to breathe. Ichigo and Renji are healed in Korinji's hot springs, the White Bone Hell and the Blood Hell Pond. The springs are no joke. Without the protective gear, the healing process would have torn their bodies apart from the inside. And Korinji points out that Ichigo and Renji went into the White Bone Hell buck naked and came out fine, which even he wasn't expecting. Korinji reveals that when he punched Ichigo in the face, Ichigo's reflexes kicked in and cracked his hand on the counter counter-strike. This is a sign of the raw ho-ho talent that earned Korinji his lightning-fast reputation. He admits that the Soul King has taken an interest in Ichigo. They then move on to Kiryu Hikifune's palace, where she cooks enormous amounts of food. Ichigo is confused because he assumed that the Zero Division training would involve grueling combat, not a banquet. But there's a reason behind the feast, as the food is infused with Hikifune's Reiatsu, and consuming it restores and strengthens their spiritual bodies from the inside out. We are shown the Reiatsu flowing into Ichigo and Renji as they eat. Hikifune warns them to proceed with caution at the next palace because Uetsu Nimaya, the creator of the Zanpakuto, is completely unpredictable. Down in the Serete, Shunsui has been appointed as the new captain commander of the Gotei 13. His first act before the Central 46 is to request for 2 lieutenants, Genshiro Okikiba to run the division and Nanao Issei to handle Shunsui himself. The Central 46 protests, but Shunsui calmly reminds them that captains have sole authority to appoint their lieutenants. His second act is far more explosive, as he announces he intends to teach Zanjutsu to Kenpachi Zaraki. The Central 46 nearly lose it here, as they remind Shunsui that they forced Yamamoto to stop teaching Kenpachi Kendo after a single day because they feared he'd become too powerful. Shunsui's response is ice cold, as he states the Soul Society won't survive the next invasion in its current state, as he questions if any of the Central 46 can protect themselves. Then Shunsui calls in the person who will handle Kenpachi's training. It's none other than Retsu Unohana, but Shunsui identifies her as Yachiru Unohana, the first Kenpachi, the most diabolical criminal in the history of the Soul Society, the woman who founded the 11th Division and mastered over 8,000 different sword styles, thus giving herself a name meaning 8,000 styles, Yachiru. We then transition to Muken, the infinite underground prison, as Kenpachi walks in grinning, commenting on how grandiose the stage is. Unohana tends to face him with her hair down and a depraved grin is on her face, with her voice actor doing an incredible job of shifting her voice tone as it's genuinely chilling. Unohana scolds Kenpachi for admiring his opponent during battle and tells him the sound of his voice always makes the scar that he gave her ache. They draw their Zanpakuto as they charge towards one another. Shunsui is seen closing a book in his office as he mentally admits that either Unohana or Kenpachi will die once they cross blades. He already knew this before he gave the order to train Kenpachi. Episode 10, titled The Battle, sees Kenpachi versus Unohana conclude in the first half of this episode, and the production team gives it the weight that it deserves. The fight is relentless as Kenpachi keeps losing consciousness and regaining it. Each time he's slightly stronger. Each death and revival strips away the subconscious limitations that he had placed on himself as a child. We also get a flashback which expands upon the manga content beautifully. A young Kenpachi Zaraki stands atop of a mountain of bodies in the Rukongai. Unohana, a member of the original Gotei 13, captain of the 11th Division, finds him at the time and they fight. She is the first person who ever gave him joy in battle, and because that joy was so overwhelming, Kenpachi unconsciously weakened himself so that the fight would never end. This is the sin that Unohana carries. She created the ceiling on Kenpachi's power by being the first real challenge that he ever had. We get extended fight sequences here to pad out their encounter, and critically we see Unohana's Bankai Minazuki properly activated on screen for the first time. Her Zanpakuto dissolves into a corrosive red liquid that fills Muken. The voice actor delivers her final performance with devastating gravity, as Unohana heals Kenpachi repeatedly, killing him and reviving him, each cycle removing yet another limitation. When Kenpachi finally hears the voice of his Zanpakuto for the first time, Unohana smiles, as this is the moment where he has surpassed her, as she dies feeling content that a worthy successor to the Kenpachi title has taken her place. The second half of the episode shifts to Uetsu Nimaya's palace, where Ichigo and Renji begin their Zanpakuto training. The tonal whiplash from Kenpachi's tragic battle against Unohana to Nimaya's eccentric goofing around was a legitimate complaint from fans. In my opinion, the Nimaya scenes should have closed out episode 9 rather than opening the back half of episode 10. But regardless, we're introduced to Nimaya's Asauchi, the nameless blank Zanpakuto that every Shinigami in the history of the Soul Society has used as the foundation of their own Zanpakuto. Nimaya is the one who forges the Asauchi, as he immediately declares that this process will never work for Ichigo. Episode 11, Everything But the Rain, sees Nimaya reveal the truth. Every Shinigami in the history of the Soul Society, whether if they're in the Zero Division, Gotei 13, or even strays like Kimpashi Zaraki who took their blade off a dead man's body, they have used an Asauchi as the base for their Zanbakudo. This is absolute and it's a fundamental rule, and Ichigo in fact has never had an Asauchi. His power didn't come from one, as his Zanbakudo was born from something else entirely, and until he understands what that something else is, Nimaya cannot help him. Nimaya fires him, literally sending him back home to Karakura town through a portal, as Ichigo finds himself back in his body standing in the rain outside of Kurosaki Clinic. The episode then transitions into one of the most critical flashbacks in the entirety of Bleach, as Isshin Kurosaki, formerly Captain Isshin Shiba of the 10th Division, tells his son the truth about his mother. 20 years ago, Isshin was stationed within Naruki City, investigating an unusual hollow that had been killing Shinigami on rainy nights. That hollow was white, a black armored creature created by Aizen's experiments. It was forged from the souls of dead Shinigami, so incidentally, it fought like a Shinigami and was capable of firing Sero. The anime delivers the fight between Isshin and White with real intensity. Isshin releases his Shikai Engetsu, coating his blade in blazing fire, but Aizen, who is cloaked and invisible, slashes Isshin across the back, robbing him of the ability to use Bankai due to the wound that he receives. White capitalizes upon this as he charges a Sero aimed directly at Isshin's face, but then Masaki Kurosaki arrives, a Quincy, as she fires a holy arrow that interrupts White's attack and draws his attention away from Isshin. The episode weaves in the Ishida household dynamics, Ryuken's protectiveness, Izumi's harsh discipline of Masaki, Masaki's refusal to stand by while someone dies even if that someone is a Shinigami, her line about never forgiving herself if she let someone die while she could act defines her entire character. She battles White head on and takes a bite wound to her shoulder, which infects her with holification. Aizen watches from the shadows and is fascinated by the unfolding events. A hollow born from a Shinigami chose a Quincy, the opposite of himself. He wants to see what happens next, as the episode closes with Hashward finding Uryu standing in the rain, bridging past and present within a single cut. Episode 12, titled Everything But the Rain, June Truth, shows us the conclusion of the flashback arc, and it's the emotional core of Core 1. Masaki's holification begins to manifest. As we witness darkness crawling across her body, her classmates noticing that she's stumbling. Urahara then bumps into her on the street and senses something wrong. Izumi Ishida discovers that Masaki fought a hollow to save a Shinigami as she confronts her. Ryuken's reaction is that he's trying to protect Masaki from his mother's anger while hiding his own feelings. This is one of the more understated character moments in the arc. As Masaki's holification worsens, Urahara presents a solution. If Isshin ties his Shinigami soul to Masaki's using a reishi string, then the opposing spiritual pressure will suppress the holification indefinitely, but the cost is that Isshin will lose his Shinigami powers for as long as the link is active. Ryuken knows that no Shinigami captain would accept this bargain. This would involve him giving up everything that he is for a Quincy that he barely knows, but Isshin, without a moment's hesitation, accepts the offer immediately. The aftermath is expanded in the anime via beautiful montage sequences, as Isshin opens the Kurosaki clinic using the medical skills that he learned at the Shino Academy. Masaki visits from college and makes fun of his white coat as he learns to live in the human world with the help of Urahara. There's a gorgeous scene of Isshin and Masaki eating lunch together. As we see her laughing at rice grains stuck to Isshin's face, they watch a movie where an old man compares his lifelong partner to the sun. Masaki cries as Isshin describes her as exactly that, the sun attracting everything, forgiving everything, and illuminating everything. Then the truth about Masaki's death is revealed. Masaki was born as a pure-blooded Quincy, so she naturally possesses an exceptionally powerful Blut Veen. The Grand Fisher should have been nothing to her, but 9 years before the current timeline, Yuobak performed the Ashvalan, a select ritual that strips impure Quincy of their powers to restore his own strength. When White had bitten into Masaki, her soul was tainted as it was mixed with a hollow, so she was deemed to be impure. Her blood veins shut off at the exact moment Grand Fisher attacked. She died because Yhwach stole her powers to fuel his resurrection, and incidentally, it left her vulnerable to Grand Fisher's attack. Ishin drops the final piece of the puzzle. Yhwach is the father of the Quincy, the one that all Quincy originate from. His blood runs through every Quincy who has ever existed. That's how he can perform the Ashmanen, and that's why Ichigo, who carries Quincy blood from Masaki, couldn't be contained by the jail. This also explains why Ichigo unconsciously activated Blood Vein against Yhwach's blade in episode 7. Ichigo now regains his resolve as the rain clears and dawn breaks. He takes his substitute Shinigami badge from Ikumi and tells Ishin that he's leaving. The origin story is now finally complete, and for the first time Ichigo understands exactly what he is: a Shinigami, hollow, Quincy, and human. Episode 13, The Blade Is Me, is the season finale, and it earns its title completely. Ichigo returns to Nimaya's palace, but this time when he walks through the crowd of Asauchi, they kneel before him as Ichigo selects one of them, which transforms white. Nimaya agrees to personally reforge his Zanpakuto. Back in this arete, we get a bunch of new scenes showing the Gotei 13 preparing for the next invasion. Hitsugaya approaches a sword instructor and requests to be retrained in Zanjutsu from the very basics because his Bankai is gone and he's not going to sit idly and do nothing. Kensei and Mashiro are training Hisagi. A hidden camera feed shows Mayuri talking about giving birth to a new Ashisogi Jizo, foreshadowing his modified Bankai that becomes critical later. Soifon is training in the mountains. Komamura enters a cave to speak with the elder of his Wolfman clan, and the atmosphere in that scene is absolutely gripping. The tense voice acting, the reveal of Komamura's clan being exiled to the shadows, the implication of a forbidden technique that comes at a terrible cost. But the heart of this episode is Ichigo's confrontation with Old Man Zangetsu in his inner world. Nimaya told Ichigo that every Shinigami needs an Asauchi. Ichigo never had one. The being who called himself Zangetsu, the tall, cloaked figure who guided Ichigo since the very beginning, this is not his Zanpakuto spirit. He is in fact the manifestation of Ichigo's Quincy powers. If you look closely, he is a younger version of Yhwach himself, and he has been suppressing Ichigo's true Zanpakuto, the inner hollow, the one that Ichigo always feared and fought against the entire time. Ichigo confronts Old Man Zangetsu as rain starts falling in his inner world. The buildings crack and split as Zangetsu confirms everything. He's the source of Ichigo's Quincy powers, and when Ichigo demands to know if he's an enemy or an ally, Zangetsu tells him that he is neither. He didn't want Ichigo to become a Shinigami because it would mean that he would endure suffering and put himself in danger. So for this reason, he placed himself at this center of Ichigo's abilities and pushed the real Zanpakuto spirit, the hollow, to the margins. But every time Ichigo was in mortal danger, it was the hollow who saved him, not Old Man Zangetsu. Zangetsu reminds Ichigo of all of those desperate moments where the mask appeared, where the berserker form took over, where raw instinct pulled Ichigo from the edge of death. That was always the real Zanpakuto reaching out to Ichigo. Zangetsu generates a massive flaming reishi broadsword and admits that he leaned into supporting Ichigo's path despite his fears, because watching Ichigo grow strong brought him joy. His body begins to disintegrate as he sheds a single tear and fades away, feeling satisfied. Ichigo reaches for him and stops as he understands now that neither Zangetsu lied to him. The old man protected him in his own way. The hollow empowered him in his own way. Both of them are Zangetsu. The blade is not one spirit or the other. The blade is Ichigo himself. Now that he understands the blade is me, Nimaya reforges the Zanpakuto, and we get to see the actual forging process play out in the anime. Nonomi kickstarts the procedure by chiseling away the interior of a massive rock pillar in order to create the forge itself. Ichigo's history with both Zangetsu spirits is replayed through carefully chosen flashbacks. This is some of the best adapted material from the entire core. The anime shows the correct moments that correlate with Old Man Zangetsu's words, how the hollow helped Ichigo during his battles in the Soul Society, how the hollow surfaced every time Ichigo was about to die, how Zangetsu quietly supported Ichigo's growth despite his fears. What emerges from the forge are two blades, a large knife-style sword representing the hollow and a smaller blade representing the Quincy. Ichigo now wields a dual Zangetsu. This is his true Shikai. Everything about his power has been broken down and rebuilt from the very foundation, and for the first time in Bleach, his Zanpakuto actually reflects who he is. The final scene cuts to Silburn as we see Hashward approach Yhwach's throne as he steps aside and Uryu Ishida walks forward in a Sternritter uniform. Yhwach welcomes him as his son and invites him to fight together. The screen then cuts to black. Cour 1 is over, with the Soul Society invaded and brought to its knees, the head captain cut down, the truth of Ichigo's heritage revealed, and his Zanpakuto reborn from the ground up, and somehow we've still barely scratched the surface on some of the best moments within the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime. Cour 1 was given the subtitle The Blood Warfare, while Cour 2 was given the title The Separation. The second season of the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime adapts 67.5 chapters of manga material across 13 episodes, spanning from chapter 543 all the way to the midpoint of chapter 609. This averages at about 5.2 chapters per episode. This is slightly faster than Cour 1's pacing of 4.8 chapters per episode, and while this increased pace creates friction in a handful of episodes, the anime staff pulled off something remarkable across this run. Cour 2 aired from July 8th to September 30th, 2023, as we kick off with episode 14 titled The Last 9 Days. Right from the get-go, the anime starts by making some bold changes that signal a very different approach from the manga. In the Royal Palace, Ichibei tells Ichigo something that wasn't in the original story at all, that in order to defeat Yhwach, he needs to surpass the very existence of a Shinigami. This anime original line changes the framing of his training arc. Ichibei is planting the seed that Ichigo's hybrid nature, being a Shinigami hollow Quincy human, is his actual weapon, and the anime is making that subtext far more explicit than anything Kubo had room for during serialization. Down in Silburn, the Sternritter gather in the cathedral for Yhwach's speech. He reminds them of the 1,000 years of humiliation that they endured hiding in the Shadow Realm after being rooted by the Shinigami. He then drops the bombshell that Uryu Ishida is his successor. Every Sternritter in the room was blindsided by this. Basbi is mentally spiraling as Giselle is confused, and Bambietta is so livid that she drags a sword out to her room and cuts him clean in half just to vent her frustration. The anime makes a notable change here by having the Schutzstaffel, Lil, Gerard, and Pernida standing on stage alongside Hashward and Yhwach, whereas in the manga, Yhwach stood alone. This is a small visual detail that sells the hierarchy of the Vandenreich more effectively. One of the biggest changes that the anime makes is around Hashward. In the manga, there's a scene where Hashward returns to his quarters and his personal aide questions Yhwach's decision. Hashward theorizes that Yhwach appointed Uryu specifically to paint a target on his back, directing the anger of the Sternritter toward the new recruit so that he'd have no allies and no room to make independent moves. The anime cuts this scene entirely. That's deliberate, and from the very first episode of Cour 2, Kubo and the anime staff are stripping away every early sign that Yhwach and Hashward distrust Uryu. Manga readers know how the betrayal arc plays out, and the anime is rebuilding the entire betrayal arc of Uryu from the ground up with a much longer build-up. The anime also reworked the order of Uryu's initiation ritual. In the manga, Uryu drinks Yhwach's blood first, and then asks why he was chosen. The anime flips this around, as Uryu questions Yhwach's reasoning before he completes the ritual. This makes far more sense because at that point, he isn't fully convinced. Hearing the explanation gives him a reason to commit rather than having lingering doubts after it's already done. A deeply personal anime original scene shows Uryu visiting his mother's grave. The site appears to be a mass burial ground for the Ashvalan victims, as Uryu tells Yhwach that ever since the day he lost his mother, he's been wondering why he survived. He says the answer was written in Soken Ishida's journal. This goes back to something that Kubo said on Club Outside a few years ago. When asked why Uryu survived the Ashvalan, he said the explanation was too complicated and he had tried to include it in the anime. This scene is confirmation that Kubo is including this information. New material in the episode for Ichigo shows him setting aside his Zanpakuto and beginning his training with Ichibei, which transports him into an ethereal realm filled with green light while he wields only a wooden sword. There's also a quiet but ominous scene of Shunsui admitting to Nanao that he doesn't know whether if Ichibei has has good intentions for Ichigo or the Serete. This unease about Squad Zero's motives has been threading through the anime since Cour 1, and it pays off in ways that manga readers can already anticipate. Episode 14 starts Cour 2 off with a lot of changes and additions that I wasn't expecting. Even the very beginning of the episode shows us a reworked Yhwach origin scene, as we see multiple hands raising up into the sky, giving Yhwach power, as he grows from a baby into an adult. This visually conveys to us the origin story from the manga. As a baby, Yhwach could not hear, see, speak, or even move. The people around him started to treat Yhwach as a god because everyone who touched him had found that they gradually gained something which they lacked. Now this happened because Yhwach had the power to share out his soul with others. Those who touched him received fragments of his soul, and these fragments healed the wounds that their own souls alone could not. At the same time as their wounds healing, the various qualities of each person were all ingrained into Yhwach's soul fragments that they carried. Once these individuals died, these fragments of Yhwach's soul had returned to him. As more and more people gathered and gained his fragments, and as he regained more of his fragments from the passing of souls, he started to become stronger. His body began to gain function as he awakened one sense after another. He was able to hear, see, and eventually move. The people had chanted out and called him Yhwach, as he realized this is the name of the god that these people were worshipping. So naturally he took on that name. Now all of this backstory from chapter 565 was adapted into this anime original sequence at the beginning of episode 14. Next we have episode 15 titled Peace from Shadows, and this picks up the intensity immediately. The Vandenreich haven't just invaded Serete, they have now replaced it. The Shadow Realm has engulfed the entire landscape of the Serete, and a frozen Quincy city now sits where the Serete used to be. Hashward approaches Shunsui in what used to be the Captain Commander's office, as it's now been absorbed into Silburn. He introduces himself as the Sternritter Grandmaster. Shunsui introduces himself as Captain Commander, and he apologizes for only being recently appointed. Yhwach explains from his throne room how the Quincy fled after they lost in the Soul Society 1,000 years ago. They used Reishi to build a hidden city in the shadows of the Serete where the Gotei 30 never thought to look. Askid Naklava shows up at the former Shinigami Research and Development Institute and casually tells the panicking technicians that the Soul Society is brimming with Reishi, which let the Quincy build up their strength for an entire millennium. We also get a significant shot of Ukitake sitting in a strange temple in the Sakahone district of Rukongai. This is far outside the Serete. He's shirtless and meditating while Sentaro and Kiyone call out to him in panic. This is the first visual indication that Ukitake is preparing something. This is the Kamikage ritual, and the anime lets it sit there without explanation for now, trusting that the audience will remember it when the payoff arrives later. We see BG9 clash with Soifon, and Asnod begins to engage with the Shinigami, while Hitsugaya faces off against Bazb with some seriously impressive effects animation showcased. The elemental contrast between Bazb's flames and Hitsugaya's ice looked incredible. A new anime original scene at the beginning of the episode has Hashward addressing all of the Sternritter before the opening song. It gives characters like Robert, BG9, Asnod, and Bambietta new lines of dialogue. Cour 2 made a conscious effort to flesh out the Sternritter as individuals, and small additions like this kept paying dividends, and we also get notable anime exclusive material that helps to portray Omaida in a more heroic manner during BG9's attack. The post-credit scene of this episode introduces us to Irazu Sando, the path with no entry to the shrine. Ichigo is struggling to walk down this path inside a strange ethereal realm, and Ichibe's commentary carries some seriously sinister undertones, as he refers to the realm by name. Via his narration, we get hints that Ichigo may be a Soul King candidate. This is all anime original material, and it immediately sets up one of the most fascinating mysteries of Cour 2. Episode 16, The Fundamental Virulence, adapts only 3 chapters of manga content, the lowest chapter count in the entire Thousand-Year Blood War arc adaptation up until this point. When most episodes were adapting around 5 chapters, dropping to 3 gave them roughly 2 extra chapters worth of time for original content, and honestly they used every second of it. The episode opens with anime exclusive scenes of the Soldad battling the Shinigami across the transformed Serete. Iba is struggling against them, Momo nearly gets cut down, Sane is healing the fallen casualties casualties. These additions make the second Quincy invasion feel like an actual war. In the manga, the sold out barely register as a threat, as the anime turns them into legitimate lieutenant tier combatants that even experienced Shinigami are struggling against. This raises the stakes dramatically, and it also justifies what happens next. Urahara communicates with the Serete as he helps Mayuri figure out the method for restoring the stolen Bankai. His explanation about how Kilgate Oppi couldn't fully control Ion's power after absorbing it leads to the creation of these shadow infiltration pills, which briefly make Bankai poisonous to Quincy. So now, the captains have reclaimed their stolen Bankai. Hitsugaya's holified Daiguren Yorinmaru erupts back to life. Soifon fires her oversized Jakuho Raikoben as the counterattack from the Shinigami begins. Now suddenly, we see a moment that nobody saw coming. Shinji's Bankai, Sakashima Yokoshima Happo Fusagari, a Bankai that only appeared in the Can't Feel Onward light novels, is finally revealed during the Thousand-Year Blood War arc. The anime drops it during the second invasion of the Quincy, as Shinji stands among dozens of dead Shinigami as the soldat who eliminated them are closing in with their holy bows drawn. Shinji says there are techniques that he can't use when his comrades are around. The petals of a large metal flower engulf him, and suddenly every soldat starts killing each other. His Bankai reverses perception, so enemies see their allies as foes. The animation, music, and the explanation of his powers are pulled straight from Can't Feel Your Own World. All are handled with a lot of serious love and care. The anime earns the Bankai's inclusion by establishing the soldat as genuinely dangerous. Shinji wouldn't need it against weaklings, but against a horde of lieutenant tier opponents where no allies are nearby, it's the perfect scenario to showcase his Bankai. Additionally, episode 16 gave us an anime exclusive fight between Hisagi, Ikaku, and Yumichika against Masty Masculine. This wasn't in the manga as Mask crashes down on 3 of them. There's a massive crater as he accepts their challenge as a 3-on-1 deathmatch. James rings the bell, Ikaku and Yumichika strike first, but Mask intercepts their attacks, slams them into each other, and sends Yumichika flying into a building. Hisagi wraps Kazushini's chains around Mask's arm, stopping him from spinning Ikaku any further. These were characters who were criminally underused in the manga as they're finally getting some screen time, and Hisagi restraining Mask raised an immediate question from the fanbase: is Kubo setting up his Bankai reveal for later in the anime? Yobak activates the Sternritter Volstandig forms, and in the anime, 7 glaring lights of different colors which represent each activation are shown, with explosive waves destroying nearby Shinigami. He states that this is where true despair begins for the Gotei 13. The post-credit scene for this episode went deeper into the Irazusando as Ichigo is shaking, struggling to stay on his feet, and as he takes another step, a wave of fragmented memories hits him. These are the memories of the Soul King. The images are disturbing and disjointed, and for a brief moment, 4 additional mirage-like pupils appear in each of Ichigo's eyes. The Irazusando doesn't seem to be training, it's something else entirely. Episode 17, titled Heart of Wolf, is an emotional gut punch from start to finish. This was Komamura's episode as it features his sacrifice and farewell, and it's one of the most bittersweet conclusions to any character arc in Bleach. The episode opens with the activation of the Sternritter Volstandig rippling across the battlefield. Each holy form is given a unique color. Bambietta's is blazing red as the reishi is shattering like glass. Shinji confronts Bambietta first, but even with Sakanade's reversed perception, Bambietta fights back by detonating everything around herself in every direction. She doesn't need to aim when everything is a bomb. A ring of explosions catches Shinji and sends him crashing down with a wound smoking on his chest. Komamura arrives and declares he has no time for her, as he intends to take Yobak's head in order to avenge the death of Yamamoto. The anime adds a great detail where Komamura tells Momo to carry Shinji to safety before activating his Bankai, because in the manga, the story kind of just forgot that Shinji and Momo were on the battlefield, so a small fix like this makes the sequence far more believable. The humanization technique flashback is where we get some really heavy material. The elder of the Wolfman clan explains what the technique actually is. Komamura's clan was banished to beast forms as punishment for sins in a previous life, and the only way to temporarily reclaim a human body is to offer up your heart. Literally, this involves tearing it out and handing it over. Komamura doesn't flinch as Yamamoto took him in when nobody else would, and the Quincy killed Yamamoto, so there's nothing else to think about for Komamura. This is his revenge revenge arc. Kokujo Tengenmyo Dangaijo is his bankai which is stripped of its armor, leaving only raw reiatsu and power. This version is able to regenerate from any damage because the bankai is essentially undead. Bambietta fires everything that she has and the holes just close. She realizes that explode can't detonate something that isn't alive. She starts running as the anime adds an extended chase sequence where the colossal bankai pursues Bambietta across rooftops, swatting away her bombs, expanding a couple of manga panels into a spectacular action sequence. Komomura finishes off Bambietta with a devastating slash that forces her projectiles back into her own body before they can detonate. She crashes into the ground with her body on fire. His bankai sets its sights now on Silburn, and from the castle balcony, Yhwach and Uryu watch the enormous figure staring them down. But the technique has a time limit. Komomura suddenly collapses as teeth lengthen into fangs, fur envelops his body, and the anime renders this with a slow, melancholic visual sequence. His silhouette against a blue backdrop, his heart beating on the Elder's plate, Komomura's body contorting beyond recognition. The Elder tells Komomura that he's grateful that Komomura chose to throw away his voice and his form for the sake of vengeance, as he then leans down and eats the heart right off the plate. Iba finds Komomura as a small, ordinary wolf. He holds his captain over his shoulders and begins walking towards Silburn, stating, "You did nothing wrong. We will confront Yhwach and avenge Yamamoto." Komomura is unable to respond. He won the fight and everything that made him who he was is now gone. New anime sequences show Uryu using Shadow to collect the defeated BG9 and Kangdu and deliver them to Yhwach, continuing to visually build his obedience to the Vandenreich. The Bambis find Bambietta's battered body, and Giselle promises to help her out with ominous implications. We also see the remainder of Hashwald's confrontation with Shunsui across the Hakuden Kepeki barrier, and Mask brutalizing Ikaku, Yumichika, and Hisagi. The post-credit sequence of this episode completes the Irazu Sando sequences, as Ichigo reaches the end of the path, screaming in pain as the Soul King's visions peak in intensity. At one point, he envisions his own body exploding from the power being forced into him. He successfully survives the ordeal and arrives at Senjumaru's palace to begin the next phase of his training. Episode 18, titled Rages at Ringside, sees the arrival of Kensei and Rose to protect Hisagi, Ikaku, and Yumichika from Mask the Masculine. The majority of this episode focuses on the fight against Mask, and the anime staff also found some time for some worthwhile exclusive additions. Kensei and Rose step in with genuine captain level authority. Kensei's bankai Tekken Tachikaze makes his fists explosive on contact, and Rose deploys Kinshara Butodan, a bankai that controls an orchestra and attacks through the music's effects. But Mask's raw physicality overwhelms both of them after his star power-up kicks in. This is fueled by the clones of James cheering him on in chorus. He batters both captains unconscious. The anime adds an exclusive scene where Rukia carries the defeated Kensei and Rose through the air to Isane's healing station. There's also a scene involving the Research and Development Institute analyzing the battlefield while Shunsui fulfills his role as head captain. Mayuri questions his ability as a leader, which is classic Mayuri, but the anime uses this to showcase Shunsui's strategic mind. He's coordinating from the shadows and delegating responsibility and trusting that his captains are able to handle their respective fights. This is a meaningful distinction from Yamamoto's leadership, which was defined by overwhelming personal force. Now, the pivotal flashback to Ichibei revealing the true name of Renji's bankai is also adapted in this episode. Hihio Zabimaru was never the real name. The true name is Soo Zabimaru. Renji then proceeds to demolish Mask with his true bankai. The Renji vs Mask fight was streamlined in the anime compared to the manga, and while some fans did have some issues, it was a necessary trade-off to accommodate the new content that Cour 2 seems to be prioritizing. The post-credit scene here features Yhwach reacting to the defeat of Mask, followed by an exchange between Hashwald and Uryu taken from chapter 565, but given entirely new context. Hashwald name-drops Soken Ishida in an anime-only line of dialogue, building upon the Soken Ishida journal scenes from Cour 1, the Grey Visit from episode 14, and every other quiet scene of Uryu following orders since. Where the manga had Hashwald openly suspicious and hostile towards Uryu during these portions of the story, the anime keeps his demeanor neutral and measured. Episode 19, titled The White Haze, is easily one of the strongest episodes of Cour too. It earns this through one of the most highly anticipated moments in the entire arc, as Rukia battles against Asnod. The episode covers Ichigo finally leaving the royal palace, the execution of Kangdu and BG9 by the Vandenreich for their failures, and more anime-only scenes between Hashward and Uryu. Kangdu and BG9 did have lines of dialogue cut from the anime, which was my only real complaint about the episode, but Rukia's fight is where the anime staff poured their hearts out. Two entirely new nightmare sequences were created as anime original visuals. The first accompanies Asnod's explanation of the concept of fear itself. This is not the fear of dying or the fear of pain, but the primordial fear that exists at the core of every soul. The imagery is genuinely unsettling as we see distorted perspectives, warped environments, surreal horror that crawls under your skin. The second nightmare sequence occurs when Rukia succumbs to Asnod's Tartarus, a dome of absolute darkness lined with thousands of unblinking eyes where fear becomes an inescapable physical reality. The anime's visual interpretation is far more terrifying than what the manga could achieve in black and white. Then Haka no Tagame, Rukia's Bankai, drops her body temperature to absolute zero and turns her into this figure of pristine white. Everything around her crystallizes as the air itself freezes, and she's standing there looking like the most dangerous, beautiful thing in the Soul Society. She possesses what's been dubbed as the most beautiful Bankai, and the anime did complete justice to this, as the ice particle effects, the ethereal color palette, the slow reveal of her transformed appearance. They really needed to get this right, and they nailed it. What hit me the hardest was Byakuya arriving afterward and complimenting her Bankai, advising her to handle it with care. We get a few quiet lines, but everything that these two characters have been through, from Byakuya almost letting her die in the Soul Society arc to him nearly dying in the first invasion to protect her, all of this weight is compressed into this single exchange. The resolution of a bond that started out so flawed, but now wrapped up with Byakuya genuinely acknowledging how far Rukia has come. The post-credit scene then introduces us to Sternritter V, the Vanishing Point Guana Lee, appearing before Isane and Yachiru as this sets up the next highly anticipated battle. Episode 20, titled I Am the Edge, sets an unprecedented record by adapting 8.5 chapters of manga material. This is because they've adapted the entirety of the Kinpachi vs Gremi fight into this episode. So we begin with Yachiru's Shikai Sampo Kenju in action against Guana Lee. The anime trims down a lot of Guanel's internal monologue, which was the right call as his rambling went on for far too long in the manga. Gremi Thamu then makes his entrance by casually willing his own creation out of existence. He then grabs Yachiru's arm and reimagines the bones inside it as cookies, as they crumble apart just like you'd expect. He already killed Kensei and Rose inside the 4th Division barrier before anyone else registered his presence. Then Kenpachi arrives and senses Yachiru's Reiatsu losing stability as the fight begins. The contrast between these two is what makes the battle iconic. Gremi can make anything real just by thinking about it, and Kenpachi has a sword with a mindset that can cut through anything. Gremi hardens his body to steel as Kenpachi cuts it. Gremi imagines himself stronger as Kenpachi asks him whether if he started imagining himself losing. This single line is the psychological turning point of the fight. The meteor sequence was a centerpiece of the episode. Gremi clones himself, doubles the power of his imagination, and summons a meteor the size of a city. The anime conveys the scale brilliantly as we see reaction shots from Baz B, the soldat, the Shinigami panicking on the ground, Renji looking up in disbelief, asking questioning if what he's seeing is even possible, and Hashward ordering troops to protect Yhwach. The protective barrier of the Serete is unable to stop the meteor as it's too massive, and it crashes straight through the barrier. Kenpachi launches himself into the sky with nothing but raw excitement on his face. He activates his Shikai Nozarashi. This manifests an enormous blade that looks more like a cleaver. He ends up splitting the entire meteor apart with a single swing. Both halves blow apart into thousands of burning chunks that scatter across the Serete. The anime also shows us Kenpachi when he was younger, when he first met Yachiru. As a last resort, Gremi tries to imagine himself having Kenpachi's power, and his body can't handle it. His imagination kills him, with his flesh tearing apart and his bones breaking. Gremi's final words were that it's scary to envision a world where he can no longer imagine anything. In the end, only Gremi's brain remains in its capsule, girl as Kinpachi looks on in silence. Cramming this fight into a single episode was a pretty big mistake. Newcomer episode director Yasaku Kikuchi did an admirable job. The animation and storyboarding were genuinely strong, but this battle deserved at least an episode and a half. The reaction sequences during the meteor's descent felt compressed, where the manga gave them breathing room. But still, the entire meteor destruction scene remains one of the greatest moments of this episode. Episode 21, The Headless Star, sees the Bambis assault Kinpachi, Ichigo's triumphant return to the Serite, and Yhwach's departure for the royal palace. The episode begins with a haunting flashback. We see an infant Yhwach maturing into a young man after absorbing the souls of thousands who linked their power to his. This builds upon the anime exclusive scene at the beginning of episode 14. Yhwach is a being who has consumed life to sustain his own existence since birth. In the present, he wakes on his throne and tells Uryu to bid farewell to this world. Meanwhile, Kinpachi discovers Yachiru's Shihakusho and lieutenant badge lying empty on the ground. There is no body or trace of where she's gone, it's just a uniform. Before he can process what this means, Candice blasts him with lightning and the Bambis descend. Lil Toto opens that grotesque mouth of hers and just chomps through a group of Shinigami like they're appetizers. Meninas picks up an entire building with one hand and drops it on another squad. Giselle lets a Shinigami slasher open and turns everyone splashed by her blood into zombified corpses. Kinpachi keeps swinging despite barely being able to stand, but Candice hits him with blast after blast as Meninas punches him into a crater and he's lying there unable to move. But then Ichigo arrives, breaking through the protective barrier and crashing into a tower miles away, then appearing behind the Bambis and in front of Kinpachi with Shumpo so fast that the rush of air blows all four of them backwards. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm here to save you, says Ichigo. Ichigo tears through every Sternritter in his path. He grabs Candice by the arm and throws her through a tower. Lil Toto attempts to clamp down on him with Golden Crunch and he straight up pries the thing apart with brute force. He dodges Meninas dropping on him from above as Candice powers up with Sclaverai and unleashes Electrocution. Ichigo counters with Getsuga Jujisho, a dual blade cross-shaped attack that rips through her technique and takes her arm clean off. Basbi arrives with his Volstandig along with Nanana, Pepe and Robert. 8 Sternritter surround Ichigo, but then the blue beam of light pierces the sky as Yhwach is invading the royal palace. Renji and the other Shinigami arrive to hold off the Sternritter while Ichigo rushes toward the tower. Meninas shoves him into a building as Robert points his Reishi pistol at his face. Basbi grabs him by the collar. This happens every time as Ichigo breaks free and keeps moving. Uryu fires a holy arrow at Ichigo from the tower, telling him to leave before he wastes his life. Ichigo screams at him, demanding to know what he's doing up there. Chad intercepts Uryu's Licht Reigen as Ichigo launches towards Yhwach and gets caught in the ascending pillar of light as Yhwach, Hashwad and Uryu depart. Deep within Muken, Aizen takes silent note of the situation. Mayuri explains in the hidden lab that Ichigo's Oken clothing broke through the 72-layer barrier between the Serite and the royal palace. This barrier now has a regeneration window of 6,000 seconds, and Yhwach and the others have exploited this as the gate to the royal palace is currently open. Episode 22, titled Marching Out the Zombies, sees Ichigo's group preparing to follow Yhwach and Mayuri's confrontation with Giselle's zombie army. In the hidden lab beneath the 12th Division barracks, Ichigo, Orihime and Chad discover the replica Kakaku Taiho that Mayuri began building as a contingency around the time that the royal guard first visited the Serite. Urahara put the finishing touches on it after arriving during the second invasion. When Ichigo admits to being impressed since he thought Mayuri was just crazy, Urahara fires back that Mayuri is a genius second only to himself. The replica is only able to fire once as it'll disintegrate after a single shot, so they need to make sure that they hit their target the first try, but they're also missing a power source. Now this is where Yoruichi comes in as she arrives with glass bottles containing a mysterious substance. These are the distortions that the Quincy have been creating between the human world and the Soul Society. Urahara pulls up a recording of Hiyori leading the other Vizards in a task force to clean up and collect these distortions. He explains that each one contains a massive amount of energy linking the two worlds. This energy will fuel the cannon. The preparation is now in motion, but the launch itself won't happen until later. Meanwhile, Basbi confronts Renji and Rukia. He offers to team up to kill Uryu since the Sternritter hate him too. Renji shatters scatters a chunk of rubble and launches it at Bazz-B while calling him a chicken head. Bazz-B is genuinely offended and threatens to kill Renji, who sarcastically assures him that chickens are awesome for getting up early to lay eggs. The banter is golden and Bazz-B's fury leads him to activate Burnerfinger 4. Ikkaku and Yumichika confront Giselle as Yumichika deduces that her emphasis on not being cut means that her blood is dangerous. She summons zombified Bambietta, who blasts both of them with explosive reishi projectiles. Mayuri enters the battlefield with his resurrected Arrancar, Dodoni, Cirucci, Lupi, and Charlotte. These modified corpses are under his control. The episode closes with a reveal of zombified Hitsugaya stepping onto the battlefield. Episode 23 is titled Marching Out the Zombies 2. It continues Mayuri vs Giselle and zombified Hitsugaya. Now this is where Cour 2 lets one of its smartest Shinigami cook. Mayuri's fighting style involves preparation, deduction, and sadism. He arrived with countermeasures, drug cocktails, and a complete understanding of zombie physiology. His modified Bankai and chemical expertise systematically dismantle every advantage that Giselle zombies have. Pepe showcases the love and ability every bit as ridiculous as it sounds. His power to control anyone hit by his love projectile creates chaotic sequences, including turning allies against each other. Lil Toto ultimately devours Pepe after reminding him that he tried to kill the other Sternritter by pitting them against one another. We did get an anime exclusive edition during this episode where we saw Byakuya's battle against Candice, Nanana, and Robert. In the manga, this fight was completely off screen, so we didn't get to see how Byakuya dealt with the three of them. The anime gave us a legitimate encounter where each Sternritter showcases their abilities before Byakuya swiftly takes them out. The pacing for this episode was pretty excellent, as the post-credit scene was a massive teaser involving Yhwach, Hashward, and Uryu arriving within the royal palace via a blue pillar of reishi, as the attention now turns to the final phase of the Quincy's plan. Episode 24, titled Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know, is iconic. This episode opens with a jaw-dropping 4-minute anime exclusive flashback. We are taken 1,000 years into the past, where Ichibei speaks to Yhwach about a non-aggression pact between the Shinigami and the Quincy. This scene is pulled from lore that originates from the Can't Be Your Own World light novels, and it reveals how Yhwach was 1,000 years ago. It highlights the original relationship between the Shinigami and the Quincy and how sinister Ichibei has always been. The flashback reveals that Ichibei sealed Yhwach's Shrift ability to Almighty before his battle against the original Gotei 13. Yhwach fought the entire First War under a massive handicap that nobody knew about. Seeing this content finally included had fans overflowing with theories and speculation. Episode 24 also establishes Yhwach's resentment towards the Soul Society for maintaining a reality that separates life and death. Yhwach wants to get rid of the existing world order out of a genuine philosophical opposition to how reality was constructed. Down in Iserate, Ganju arrives at the hidden lab as he declares himself the expert on the royal palace. He brings Kukaku's roadmap and joins the crew. Despite Ichigo warning him that this will be the most dangerous battle that they've ever faced, Ganju's response is clean. He says, "That's exactly why I'm coming." They then launch from the replica cannon across the battlefield as Byakuya, Renji, Shunsui, Nanao, and Mayuri watch the smoke trail disappear into the sky. Mayuri calls it an ugly liftoff that couldn't have been calibrated any more poorly. In the royal palace, Senjumaru confronts Yhwach's forces with the divine soldiers. Nyanzol Weasel appears with the wind, warping the fabric of space around him in order to deflect attacks, even preventing Kurinji's hot spring techniques from connecting. But Senjumaru exposes his weakness. He can't deflect what he doesn't perceive. Her divine soldiers approach from behind and she eliminates him before pushing his corpse off the platform. The episode rearranges events so that each Zero Division member gets a respective moment on the battlefield. The Schutzstaffel confront the Royal Guard inside Kiryo's Cage of Life. Kurinji drops down to fight as Senjumaru reveals herself behind Claude. Hikifune swings in on branches as Nimaya cuts Lil's holy arrow in slow motion with Sayafushi. Meanwhile, Ichigo and his friends discuss Yhwach's intentions in all new dialogue during their journey. Ichigo wonders whether if replacing the Soul King is even possible. The second half of the episode takes a massive departure from the manga, as Yhwach escapes Kiryo's Cage of Life ahead of schedule by throwing his medallion across and having Uryu switch him with it using the antithesis. Nimaya praises the clever exit as Yhwach confronts Ichibei directly while the Schutzstaffel are still incapacitated. This is totally different from the manga, where Yhwach only escaped after having revived the Schutzstaffel via Ashvalan. Similar to the Cour 1 finale, episodes 25 and 26 released together as a double feature. Episode 25 is titled The Master. It has a lot of heavily reworked manga material. The anime massively expands upon the Zero Division's confrontations with the Schutzstaffel, as we get anime-exclusive fight scenes that were never in the manga. Uryu battling Senjumaru and Hashward fighting Korinji. Uryu demonstrates some mysterious new powers during his confrontation, his eyes turning red with blue Quincy veins surrounding them, showcasing abilities we'd never seen in the manga. Hashward's combat sequences against Korinji feature similarly unseen powers. In the manga, the Zero Division felt like they were there to get bodied, but the anime gives them a lot more justice. The episode reworks the order of events so heavily that it becomes almost unrecognizable. Manga content from multiple chapters is chopped and rearranged and woven together with original scenes in order to create something that functions as an entirely new version of this section of the story. The post-credit scene of this episode adapts Shunsui's brief meeting with Ukitake. Ukitake reveals that the Kamikake ritual has been completed. This builds upon the setup from the temple scene back in episode 15. Ukitake completing the Kamikake ritual is just in time as the enemy are in the royal palace. Shunsui reveals that he's headed to the Central 46 to deal with another pressing matter. This is a pretty suspenseful cliffhanger heading straight into the finale of Cour 2. Episode 26, the final episode of Cour 2, is titled Black. Yhwach casts Ashvalan, reviving and empowering the Schutzstaffel, as Hashwald states that the scales have been tipped, and then we get a sequence that changes the anime. The royal guard execute their sacrifice technique. Korinji temporarily blinds Lil so Senjumaru can revive Nimaya. Hikifune separates the Schutzstaffel into 4 chambers within the Cage of Life so the royal guard can battle them individually, each initially overpowering their Quincy opponent, but the Schutzstaffel push back with their Shrift abilities, and the cage crumbles as Nimaya, Korinji and Hikifune then willingly end their own lives to break the Blood Oath seal, which in turn unleashes Senjumaru's true power. She activates her Bankai, Shitatsu Karagara Shigarami no Suji, and what follows is one of the most unpredictable moments within Cour 2. Her Bankai is a loom of fate that traps each opponent within their own personalized death, a death that prophetically foreshadows their actual death later in the story. Lil is blinded by radiant light, foreshadowing his battle against Shunsui. Askin is crushed by 3 jagged coffin-like blades, representing the 3 opponents who eventually take him down. Pernida is swallowed by an infinite vortex of sand, mirroring how he'll later be overwhelmed by the multiplication of Nemu's cells. Gerard has his limbs frozen solid. This foreshadows his battle against Kimpachi, Hitsugaya and Byakuya. Hashward is reduced to ashes by flames, foreshadowing his confrontation with Bazbi. And Uryu has a Quincy cross, draining his energy and his life. This foreshadows how Yhwach will steal his power if he stays on this path. After appearing to have eliminated 6 of the Schutzstaffel, Senjumaru embroiders them onto textile tapestries as a permanent mark of their defeat. The remainder of the episode covers Ichibei's clash with Yhwach, Ichimonji's true power, as every single instance of the color black across all of existence feeds into this Zanpakuto. His Bankai Shirafude Ichimonji is able to rewrite the identity of anything that his ink has touched, so he drenches Yhwach in black ink and writes a new name on him, which is Black Ant. He then flattens him between 2 colossal palms like he's swatting an insect. The episode deliberately stops before Yhwach activates the Almighty. This has been saved for Cour 3's opening. At the end of Cour 2, we get a 4-minute Shinigami illustrated guide post-credit segment, which adapts comedic moments from chapters 516 and 545 that were cut earlier. So they've held back on the Almighty, which was a right call, as it ensures that Cour 3 opens at full intensity. Cour 2 concluded having adapted over 67 chapters of manga content. Combined with Cour 1's 63 chapters, this is over 100 130 chapters in the first half of the Thousand-Year Blood War arc anime. With the separation ended, we now enter Cour 3, The Conflict. For this third season, the anime staff deliberately slowed their pacing to just under 4 chapters per episode, compared to the roughly 5 chapters per episode we received in previous Cours. This breathing room allowed them to expand upon characters who were sidelined in the manga and add brand new fight sequences and restructure the order of events from the manga in a way that improves upon the narrative. In the manga, major battles of this arc happened sequentially: Hashward vs Bazb first, followed by Mayuri vs Pranita, then Shunsui vs Lil. Each fight played out from beginning to end before the next one started. The anime instead splits Mayuri and Shunsui's fights into 2 halves each and intercuts them, with Bazb and Hashward's battle placed after both of these conflicts. This restructuring sold the chaos of an actual war where multiple engagements were happening at once, and the result was a far more effective viewing experience. And overall, Cour 3 had very little cut manga content. Most of the changes involved altering or reworking material rather than removing it. Episode 27 is titled A. The first half revisits Senjumaru's Bankai. All of this was material from the second half of episode 26, but there was a new scene inserted that hadn't appeared before. Ichigo and the others react to the sheer weight of Senjumaru's spiritual pressure from below. Ichigo comments that his new clothes, his new powers, everything he received was from the Zero Division. Ganju says he's never felt anything like this before, and Orihime asks Ichigo whether if the Zero Division can handle Yhwach. Ichigo agrees, but his face tells a different story. He appears to have a bit of a defeated expression after he says it, hinting that he's far less confident than his words suggest. The second half of the episode begins with new content as Yhwach awakens his Shrift, the Almighty. In the manga, the Almighty's name was revealed at the end of chapter 609 as a cliffhanger. We instead get Hashward's full explanation from the beginning of chapter 610 first, how Yhwach fought with his eyes closed this entire time because opening them before the 9 years of regaining his strength had elapsed would have risked his power spiraling out of control. Now this is before cutting to the visual reveal. This order works better in the anime as the audience have full context before they are shown what the Almighty is. Now of course, it's thanks to the Almighty that Yhwach is able to defeat Ichibei. Impressively, we get an anime original battle between Uryu and Senjumaru. The Almighty's activation frees Uryu from the fabric imprisoning him, and his eyes turn red with blue Quincy veins flickering around them intermittently, a mysterious visual introduced to tease powers gained from Yhwach's awakening. Senjumaru threatens to sew his eyelids shut as Uryu challenged her to keep up with his speed as he fires a holy arrow at her, but she moves through her draped fabrics like she was slipping between dimensions. She then transforms the floor beneath Uryu to lava, spawning hollows from her fabric that chase him down. She then traps him by having fabric emerge from within a hollow's corpse that it just destroyed. She pins him down and pierces the back of his neck with a sewing needle, and this is revealed to actually be the Shikai form of a Zanbakudo. Uryu activates his Volständig and breaks free. His wings are surged with Reishi, and here's where we properly see his Shrift, the antithesis. He somehow swapped positions with Senjumaru as she is now trapped in her own Bankai, and he fires a holy arrow straight through her chest. Ichigo, Urahara, Ukitake, and Mayuri all sense her Reiatsu vanish. The other Schutzstaffel were freed from within their tapestries. The episode ends with Yhwach destroying Ichibei's seal as he builds a Reishi staircase to the Greater Soul King Palace and ascends with his Schutzstaffel as he reflects on the 1,000 years of Quincy suffering and their first failed invasion of the Serete. Ichigo and his friends arrive at the palace to discover the aftermath. Ichibei's body is in pieces across the ground. Orihime sets up Soten Kishun around his head as we also get brief slices of life in Karakura Town. We see Karin, Yuzu, Isshin, Tatsuki, Keigo, and Mizuhiro going about their day, plus scenes of Rukia, Renji, Momo, Shinji, and Soifon processing the situation in the Serete below. These small anime exclusive editions remind you just exactly what's at stake. Episode 28, titled Kill the King, opens with a striking anime original sequence. We get a flashback to the origins of the Soul King. We see Yhwach as a child watching his father separate the primordial world into 3 separate realms as he uses a ceremonial special sword. The Soul King's limbs are severed and scattered as we then see him bound in crystal. A young Yhwach sheds a single tear as he recalls his infant body, born without senses. He is held followed by thousands of reaching hands, and then Ichigo appears within the vision, looking up at Yhwach in confusion before snapping back to reality. The vision carries a lot of weight for what happens next. Ichigo's group rides Orihime's Santen Kishun all the way up to the Greater Soul King Palace. Down in the replaced Serete, we get a scene of Renji reassuring Rukia that they have to trust their friends before the two link up with Shinji's group. Once Ichigo and the others reach Yhwach, the confrontation escalates quickly. Events are restructured as Ichigo's assertion that he can't stay out of the fight even if someone else could battle Yhwach is repositioned to occur while they're actively clashing. This is before the Soul King's impalement is revealed. In the manga, he says this after the Soul King is stabilized by Mimihagi. Moving it earlier gives Ichigo a bit more agency. Yoruichi attempts to trap Yhwach by surrounding him with Tenchi Heso, heavenly gifted armament, a sacred Shihoin clan weapon that's composed of razor-sharp yellowish-orange wire. But the Quincy Emperor sets them ablaze with blue reishi flames and shatters them with a shockwave that sends burning pieces onto the curtains behind him. The Soul King is then revealed with Yhwach's reishi sword driven through his chest. There's an important line here from Yhwach that he needed someone with human, Shinigami, Fullbringer, Quincy, and Hollow powers to fully break the Soul King's seal. Ichigo is that person. Ichigo attempts to pull the reishi sword free, but we see blood veins crawl up his arm and the side of his face. Yhwach's Reiatsu calls to the Quincy blood inside of Ichigo, and his body is forced to slash horizontally, cutting the Soul King diagonally in half. We also get reactions from Keigo, Mizuhiro, and Tatsuki reading news on their phones in Karakura Town, with Mizuhiro deducing that what they're feeling isn't a natural earthquake. Episode 29, The Dark Arm, packs in over 10 minutes of anime original content. We have 5 original flashback sequences which trace Ukitake's life. We see his childhood encounter with Mimihagi when he was 3 years old, when his parents begged the right hand of the Soul King to cure his terminal illness, his first meeting with Shunsui at the Shinigami Academy, and a scene set after Yamamoto's death where Unohana bids farewell to Ukitake as she slips into her Yachiru persona. While Ukitake insists that they'll see each other soon, this line carries a lot of weight when you know what's ahead for both characters. In the present, Ukitake announces that he'll take the dead Soul King's place. He discards his captain's coat, removes the upper half of his Shihakusho, and reveals the shadowy Mimihagi eye on his back. Rukia calls out to him as Ukitake begins the Kamikake ritual. This gives Mimihagi dominion over every organ in his body, not just the lungs that it's been living in order to sustain Ukitake. By doing this, Ukitake has become the Soul King's replacement right arm. A Mimihagi tattoo manifests across his torso as Rukia demands to know what happens to the 13th Division if he dies. Ukitake simply apologizes for making things hard for her. We then get a montage of their history as we see all of the lessons and kind words exchanged before Rukia shrieks in anguish. Ukitake reminds her of the 2 types of battles, to protect life and to defend honor. Darkness then bursts from his eyes and mouth as Mimihagi extends into the sky and wraps around the remains of the Soul King. The Royal Palace confrontation was also restructured with new scenes. Chad attempts to land a direct hit on Yhwach as Yoruichi, Ganju, and Chad perform a combined attack to buy Orihime time to heal the Soul King with Sonten Keshun, but the barrier shatters. A mere human's power is unable to revive the Soul King. Yhwach blasts them all back with reishi flames. The episode then ends with Shunsui arriving in Muken as he mentally recounts Ukitake's words about the 2 types of battles, as he invites Aizen to talk. All of these threads, Ukitake's sacrifice, Shunsui's desperation, and Aizen's return, all converge within this episode. Episode 30, titled The Betrayer, shows us over 12 minutes of original content, and it totally changes how Uryu's betrayal arc unfolds. Ichigo vs Uryu was expanded into a full battle with actual choreography and emotional stakes. While Mimihagi keeps Yhwach busy below, Ichigo and Uryu clash above the Greater Soul King's palace. Uryu can now generate holy arrows directly from his hands as he discovers Ichigo's Quincy heritage by seeing him use Blutveen mid-combat. Uryu activates his Volständig and overwhelms a reluctant Ichigo, because Ichigo doesn't want to hurt him. He fires a Getsuga Jujisho that intentionally avoids Uryu, as he counters Uryu's attack without targeting him directly. Uryu calls him naive as he then manifests his holy bow and fires a single arrow straight through Ichigo's upper right side. This leaves a massive jagged hole as Ichigo falls from the royal palace. Gerard laughs and accepts Uryu as one of the Schutzstaffel. Orihime, Chad and Ganju also get expanded roles. They take on the Schutzstaffel directly as Ganju buries them with Renkan Sepasen, and for a moment it works, but the Schutzstaffel flew back out with their partial Volstandigs activated. Gerard knocks all three of them off of the greater royal palace. Some important flashbacks show Uryu reading Soken Ishida's journal and learning about the Quincy Blood War. This calls back to scenes from Cour 1. The episode's closing sequence hits hard as Yuobak has the Schutzstaffel raise reishi swords overhead, which he merges into a broadsword. He slashes through the Soul King's crystal, shattering it, and he absorbs the Soul King into himself. Darkness erupts from his body with multiple eyes which sprout across his face. The Soul King is now gone and the three realms are on the verge of collapse. Episode 31, titled Against the Judgment, deals with the immediate aftermath of Yuobak absorbing the Soul King, as we have a lot of restructured manga content along with significant new additions. Darkness surges from Yuobak's body, which erupts from the bottom of the Greater Soul King Palace, and it slams into the protective barrier of the Serite below. Millions of eyeball creatures are formed from the torrent and they flood the streets of the Soul Society. Soifon rushes outside and activates Jakuho Raikoben in order to intercept them, but she gets swept up before she could fire. Hisagi, Ikaku and Yumichika cut through them with their Shikai as Byakuya deploys Senbonzakura in a sweeping wave of blade petals, but the horde overwhelms even that. Then a Reiatsu emerges, which is so dense it crushes the creatures into paste on the ground as it stops everyone in their tracks. We see Aizen sitting on Chair-sama as he criticizes the Shinigami for fighting with their Zanbakuto instead of their Reiatsu. He then congratulates Rukia on her promotion to lieutenant. The Shinigami react exactly how you'd expect. Renji protests, with Ikaku refusing to accept help from Aizen, and Soifon calls it disgraceful. Shunsui questions if this was about defending their own honor, as he tells them that honor isn't going to protect the world. He states that using evil to defeat evil is not evil itself. Aizen unleashes Hado 90 Kurohitsugi without incantation, which flattens the surrounding area. Urahara notes that this kind of damage without an incantation means that Aizen might be even more powerful than during his battle against Ichigo. Renji realized that Aizen had gotten stronger inside Muken. A notable change was that Hashwald's dialogue from the manga explaining the eyeball creatures as the Soul King's torrent of power was given to Aizen instead. Aizen theorizes that they poured out as a result of Yuobak struggling to contain the Soul King's power. He adds that Yuobak's spiritual pressure has changed, and it would take time for even the Quincy King to fully suppress what he'd just absorbed. This made more sense dramatically since Aizen was the one addressing the Shinigami. Aizen then attempts to shoot down the royal palace by exerting his Reiatsu into a beam that pierces the protective barrier of the Serite and disperses the darkness. But Mayuri's restraint technology kicks in and cuts his output before he could reach the palace. Mayuri approaches with a medallion and mocks Aizen for thinking that his power could surpass the 12th Division's technology. Aizen then suggests that Mayuri set the restraints to maximum to see who was stronger. At this point, Nanana strikes Aizen with the underbelly, paralyzing him. Shunsui was astonished that the paralysis only lasted 5 minutes. Aizen notes that it was the first time that he'd ever been paralyzed. Shunsui then rallies the surviving Gotei 13 in an anime original speech. By contacting the unseated Shinigami across the Serite to gather at the former Research and Development Institute location, they explained the plan to now storm the royal palace. The Vizard put on their Shihakusho. Hiyori paused the Reishi for Urahara's gate as Ichigo is healed by Orihime, with Kon catching his unconscious body in muscular form. This is a bit of a change from the manga, where Orihime catches him with Santen Keshun. Aizen watches the Shinigami and Quincy join forces from below, and he muses that they weren't fighting to protect the Soul Society together, they were fighting to catch up to and destroy Yuobak. He then remarks that Ichigo was truly insufferable for being the one to both defeat him and enter the royal palace before him. Towards the end of the episode, Grimjow then appears within a Garganta as he greets Ichigo for the first time since the Arrancar arc. Episode 32, titled The Holy Newborn, is a downtime episode focusing on preparation before the storm. The highlight of this episode was Ichigo reuniting with Grimmjow and Nell, as Grimmjow leaps out of the Garganta, commenting on how long it had been, and immediately he tries to slash Ichigo. Nell flies in from behind and knocks Grimmjow aside while cheerfully greeting Ichigo, revealing that Urahara made her a bracelet to switch between child and adult forms. The comedy of Orihime's reaction to Nell's adult form was retained perfectly in the anime. Riruka and Yukio also appear as they help Ichigo and the others to return to the royal palace. They are within Yukio's elevator as Ichigo tells both Yukio and Riruka to stay behind, explaining that their abilities wouldn't keep them alive in this battle. He then asks Riruka to stay ready with Yukio to extract his group at any time. Meanwhile, down in the Serite, the Shinigami and Quincy channeled their Reiatsu into orbs to power Urahara's gate. Yobak completes his absorption of the Soul King's power, and the Vandenreich city begins being stripped away and lifted towards the sky. The 5 cities within the royal palace are surrounded by blue energy, forming a colossal Quincy cross. Yobak declares his castle the foundation for a new world, as he dubs it Vaherveld. We then get reactions from Bazbi, Lil Toto and Giselle watching the formation, as well as Shunsui promising Ukitake's struggling body that his sacrifice won't be in vain. The Shinigami, Vizard and surviving Sternritter enter the gate. Episode 33, titled Gate of the Sun, gives us over 10 minutes of anime original content. The first half of it covers the Schutzstaffel dispersing across Vaherveld via the Gates of the Sun. Yobak addresses each of them by name, Lil, Gerard, Pernida, Askin and Uryu, as he orders them to slaughter the invaders to commemorate the new world. Lil's sniping sequence was expanded considerably in the anime as Hisagi collapses and the group react with alarm, with Omaida and Kiyone trying to help, but Lil shoots them too. Then Isane and Sentaro, as Shunsui realizes that they were under collective attack and he orders everyone to scatter while Lil picks them off, as he refers to them as sinners for trying to evade him. You actually feel the terror of being hunted by something you can't see. Grimmjow then runs into Askin and slashes through his gift ball, which explodes in his face. Askin prepares to kill Grimmjow for not begging for his life before Ichigo appears on the rooftop to confront him. This is another change from the manga, where Ichigo found Askin in the streets. The second half of the episode gives us an all-new fight between Renji and Uryu. Renji initially overwhelms Uryu with the brute force and explosive power of So'o Zabimaru. Even after Uryu activates his Volstandig, Renji's raw power was too much, but Uryu adapts as he boosted himself with Sclaverai, draining Renji's Reiatsu to nullify his Zanpakuto. Renji manages one final weakened Hikotsu Taiho before Uryu shoots him through his chest. There was a flashback from Renji's training with Ichibei here, plus a brief reaction shot of Mayuri finding the battle boring, while Kinpachi found it intriguing. Renji was also separated from the main Shinigami group earlier than in the manga. In the manga, he stays with them until the Gerard fight. The fact that he separates earlier here creates a completely different chain of events for the rest of the core. Episode 34, titled Baby Hold Your Hand, adapts the Mayuri vs Pernida fight. The episode begins with Lil watching Uryu stand over a defeated Renji before the remaining captains regroup on the streets below. We see Kinpachi charge at the hooded Pernida without hesitation as Mayuri shouts out a warning, but it's too late. Kinpachi's arm was instantly mangled by the compulsory. This is Pernida's ability to control others through its nerves. Kinpachi's arm twisted and folded in on itself, then started moving his Zanpakuto towards his own head. Kinpachi rips the arm off at the shoulder. The severed limb gets drawn to Pernida and it's torn apart in a shower of blood. Mayuri approaches and deduces the nature of the compulsory. Pernida slips its nerves into enemies' bodies in order to control their movements. He countered with acid, splashing it across the exposed nerves and causing Pernida to screech and retract. When Kinpachi ignores Mayuri's advice to stay back and charges in for a second time, Pernida's nerves infiltrate his entire body as his legs are then broken. Blood gushes from multiple points as Mayuri stabs him through the chest from behind with Ashisogi Jizo in order to paralyze his limbs. He then uses Ashisogi Jizo Kyodo Yon, a sonic attack that completes the full body paralysis. Mayuri's gratitude towards Kenpachi was delivered with his trademark sadistic politeness. The captain had helped him identify both the enemy's power and an area of Ashisogi Jizo that needed improvement. Pernita ripped through its cloak and revealed itself as the Soul King's left arm, a colossal hand with a two-pupiled eye staring out from its palm. It then grows out an arm from its base and extends nerves into the ground to tower over the Shinigami. Mayuri then utilizes Hairen Hyakushus that he developed to mimic the Quincy's aerial techniques. He stays above the nerve-covered ground entirely. He severs Pernita's pinky with a detonation, but the severed finger grows into a full clone with its own eye. Then the clone's nerves begin infiltrating Mayuri's arm, forcing him to rapidly reconfigure his own nerve muscle and blood vessel arrangements with his other hand. There was also a quiet moment in the episode where Nemu told Yumichika that she hoped Mayuri hadn't changed at all, confusing him completely. This line carries a bit more weight when you reach the next part of the fight. But before that, we have episode 35, Don't Chase a Shadow, which shows us Shunsui vs Lil. Lil observes the running Shinigami from a building far behind them, as he muses that they must be terrified, admitting that he would be too. This is because they are losing comrades one by one to attacks from a distance that they cannot comprehend. We also receive a scene of Askin clashing with Ichigo and inferring that his Royal Palace training was why he wasn't experiencing reishi poisoning, before he gets ready to prepare more gift balls. This intercutting between battles keeps the pacing dynamic in this episode. Shunsui located Lil and was shot through the chest the instant that he spotted him, but the real Shunsui appears behind Lil with Daruma-san, the children's game ability from his Shikai. As he severs off most of Diagram's barrel, Lil reveals his shrift, the X-axis, which penetrates through everything. There is no concept of dodging against it. When Shunsui's ability Kage Oni failed and Zangarin couldn't harm Lil at all, Shunsui finds himself at the end of his rope. He retreats to the city where they first entered Varavelt, hoping everyone else was far enough away. Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju, his Bankai extended a golden aura out for miles when he activated it. Panels formed in the sky as shadowy tree branches crawled across the ground. Katen appeared as a shadow leaning over his shoulder. Ichigo, Askin, and everyone across Varavelt felt the weight of Shunsui's Bankai activate. Then the 4 acts played out like a staged tragedy. The first act of the Bankai involves any wound that is inflicted on the enemy appears on one's own body. Holes appear in Lil's torso. The second act, an incurable disease born from shame, as Lil's body erupts in discolored patches, blood streams from his face. The third act involves a vast ocean that traps Lil as he cannot escape no matter how desperately he flaps his wings. Then the final act involves a white thread of regret wrapping around Lil's neck before decapitating him. Shunsui then collapses into Katen's lap as she muses about both of them missing their right eyes. He tries to tell her something, but then Lil's headless body teleports above. His head regenerates as it's revealed that he isn't dead yet. We then turn to episode 36, Baby Hold Your Hand 2, Never Ending My Dream, which shows us the conclusion of Mayuri vs Pernita. Pernita evolves by absorbing data from Kenpachi. Its nerves now operate at Kenpachi's level of speed and power. Mayuri's nerve-freezing agent manages to stop Pernita and one clone, but the remaining clone severed its own thumb before the coagulation had spread. Then it starts speaking like Kenpachi, addressing Mayuri by his last name. It sheds the frozen skin layer using the layered skin ability from Mayuri's own modified Bankai. Pernita was eating Mayuri's own techniques and throwing them back at him. Nemu then intervenes without orders as she grabs a nerve-infused holy arrow aimed at Mayuri, as she then cuts off her own arm before the nerves could spread, and she falls to the ground. Mayuri pulls her away from the nerve-covered ground and scolds her. She told him that she judged he needed a shield. He addresses her as Nanago Nemuri, her full designation, and asks if she understood what it would take to develop the next version of her to this level. She says she doesn't, as he screams at her not to act on her own judgment. She doesn't have the freedom to die on her own will, as she dies only when he tells her to. She then fires Geek on Judy, and then Pernita consumes her. Zal Opero then returns as a figment of Mayuri's imagination, taunting him about the speech on perfection that he'd given during the Hueco Mundo arc. Mayuri, grieving over a creation that he said he felt nothing for, was a direct contradiction of everything that he had taught Zal Opero. This moment was truly nailed within the the anime. But Nemu's body contains a failsafe. It's a regenerative organ that's designed to force cells into runaway multiplication. Without her brain to regulate the process, the consuming organism would grow out of control and self-destruct. We then see the Pernida clone explode as Mayuri walks away with Nemu's brain secured in his captain's code. Ikkaku and Yumichika carry Mayuri to preservation pods containing a de-zombified Hitsugaya and Rangiku. Their lifespans have been reduced, but they are alive. Kinpachi was placed in another pod as Ikkaku and Yumichika knelt before Mayuri and thanked him for saving Kinpachi. He says that being thanked is disgusting, as he then declares that he had surpassed Urahara. He created a soul that evolves on its own from nothing. As the pod closed around him, he envisions Nemu floating above. The post-credit scene expands upon manga material from chapter 635, as it shows Giselle with Lil Toto battling Soldat alongside the zombified Bambis. The fallen Soldat regenerate with dark liquid covering their heads and eyes as they resemble Yuhobaks, which is deeply unsettling. Bazby then confronts Hashward after shooting the Soldat that he was commanding, setting up their long-awaited confrontation. This brings us to episode 37, titled Shadows Gone. So we last saw Lil regenerating his head as he enters a monstrous new form of his Volstandig called Jithiel. He declares himself to be God's immortal and invincible messenger. He fires Sabaki no Komyo, a beam that rips through entire sections of the city and pierces through the underside of Varvelt. Katen urges Shunsui to run, as he's fought hard enough he could barely breathe, but before he could drift into unconsciousness, Nanao shakes him awake and asks for her Zanpakuto. The episode unfolds the Issei clan backstory through interwoven flashbacks. Shunsui's brother Shunzan and his wife Isuzu Issei. The hairpin exchange between them, with Isuzu keeping one and asking Shunzan to hold the other so he'd feel close to him when he was fighting hollows. Young Shunsui smirks at them from the porch. We also get scenes of Nanao failing to imprint on an Asauchi, practicing Kido at the Shinigami Academy, and taking the Gotei 13 enlistment exam early. All of this contextualizes why she became a Kido specialist. Then we see the tragedy, Ukitake informing Shunsui that Isuzu was executed by the Central 46 for the misplacement of a sacred treasure. This is the very Zanpakuto that Shunsui had been hiding from Nanao ever since. Shunsui smiled at Ukitake as he walked away, but the smile quickly disappeared. He tells himself that it was his fault. In another flashback, a dying Shunzan handed him his hairpin, and Shunsui wonders why everyone keeps entrusting him with their precious possessions and then dying. Inside Kageoni, Shunsui returned Nanao her ancestral weapon, Shinken Hakyoken, as Kyokotsu appears behind her. Nanao bursts from a small shadow on Lil's reformed face and swings the blade downward. Lil intercepts with his left wrist at the last second, and the blade cuts clean through. His hand separates in a burst of golden light that sends Nanao tumbling to a rooftop below. Lil is shaken as he admits the weapon could actually harm him and begins gathering reishi for a killing blow. On the rooftop, Nanao was trembling. She had no idea fighting with a sword would be so terrifying, as she didn't know getting cut would hurt so much too. She was about to lower her arms when Shunsui appears behind her and rests his hand over hers on the handle. His presence steadies her, as Lil forms Trumpet, a massive trumpet of golden reishi above his head, as he then fires it. The blast erases a massive circular portion of the city, but Shinken Hakyoken did what it was designed to do. It reflects the energy of a god's power back at him. A thin strip of Lil's body is erased as cracks form. He calls it sinful. His body explodes outward in a shower of golden energy that rains down as feathers. Shunsui catches Nanao before she collapses and praises her, and then stumbles and collapses himself. Episode 38, titled Friend, belongs entirely to Bazby and Hashward. We see 1,000 years of friendship that is reduced down to ashes within 20 minutes. The flashbacks within this episode take us back to their youth, as young Hashward is unable to hit a rabbit with a wooden arrow. Young Bazby skewers it from a tree branch with a holy arrow and acts like he owned the forest, as Bazby's home was destroyed by Yuhobak's Ashvalin, and his entire motivation for growing stronger was revenge against the Quincy King. He trains Hashward and teaches him everything, but then Yuhobak chooses Hashward as his successor instead of recognizing Bazby's power, because Hashward possessed the ability to grant power to others, the exact complement to Yuhobak's own ability. New flashback scenes expand upon the young Bazbi and Hashwald's bond. As young Bazbi tells Hashwald that it teach him everything that he needs to become stronger, these additions gave the present day confrontation its devastating emotional context. In the present, Bazbi confronts Hashwald and demands a real fight. He learns that Hashwald knew about the Ashvalan that struck the Sternritter and did nothing about it. Bazbi unleashes his burner finger techniques with incredible sakuga from Pierrot's finest animators. Yuki Sato's dynamic work on the fire effects was a standout here, but the episode focuses its resources on enhancing the emotional impact of the broken bond through the flashback sequences rather than extending the present day battle. Now, this was always a tragic execution rather than a real fight. Hashwald was incomprehensibly more powerful with the balance. Bazbi ends up falling as he hits the ground, and we hear dialogue from their youth play out. Young Bazbi's voice telling Hashwald he'd teach him everything, as the title card friend appears in lowercase. We now finally reach the Core 3 finale, which begins with episode 39, The Visible Answer. This episode opens with a scene that I really love. Ukitake continues to release Mimihagi's power, with the Kamikake taking on a tree-like shape across the Serite, its branches extending outward to cover the area with a multi-hued aura. This answers questions that the manga never really addressed: why the three realms hadn't completely collapsed despite Yhwach having absorbed the Soul King. Well, it was because Ukitake was still fighting with Mimihagi. The Vizards rescued and healed Renji after his fight with Uryu. Shinji and Momo work together in new combat sequences. Soifon receives proper screen time that was completely absent from the manga. Characters who got shafted in the manga were finally getting their due. The major narrative development was Hashwald confronting Uryu before the Gate of the Sun, revealing that he now possessed the Almighty. His eyes now bear 3 pupils, because he and Yhwach swap powers while Yhwach sleeps. He describes seeing the future as a terrible thing. Yoruichi's confrontation with Askin also begins here, as Askin pursues Yoruichi as she tries to move Yushiro, prompting her to briefly blind him and throw him into a building. Simultaneously, Gerard's rampage escalates as he found a wounded Momo hiding in a building. He smashes his hand through the structure and criticizes the Gote 13 for putting up such a pathetic resistance to the miracle. Rose then struck his face with Kinshara and clarified that it was miraculous that Gerard couldn't crush a wounded girl. Shinji walks away with Sakanade and denies that any of this was miraculous before promising that the Vizards would show Gerard a real miracle. All of them collectively stand with their hollow masks donned and their captain coats worn. This scene had fans going crazy because, as you know, the Vizards were criminally underutilized during this portion of the manga. Uryu's confrontation with Hashwald also progresses, as Hashwald accuses Uryu of betraying Yhwach, while Uryu observes that the Almighty was far from omnipotent when Hashwald was wielding it, since Hashwald was surprised by things that he hadn't foreseen. The post-credit scene of episode 39 shows Isshin and Ryuken at what appears to be Kanai Katagiri's grave. This sets up their early arrival within Vaherveld. This was a huge change from the manga's timeline and a clear signal that Core 4 is going to expand their involvement well beyond what the manga gave us. Final episode of Core 3 titled My Last Words. With only about 2 chapters of content adapted, there are loads of new additions here that reshape the story as we head into Core 4. Uryu's character was expanded via new flashback sequences showing his relationship with Soken Ishida, including Soken writing in his journal about Yhwach's true nature and the duty of the remaining human world Quincy to stop Yhwach. We finally witness the Ring of Ashvalan forming over Karakura town. Masaki sees it, young Uryu and his maid collapse, Kanai Katagiri was left unaffected. The connection between Uryu's past trauma and his present motivations are now sharper than they have ever been. The fight between Ichigo and Uryu was given some serious upgrades here with new Sakuga sequences as Ichigo battles Uryu outside the Gate of the Sun chamber, distracting him by cutting through the castle and covering the area in dust, then tackles him to the ground as Chad throws Ichigo at Uryu and Ichigo pulls him down into a pit created by their colliding attacks. In this pit, Uryu finally reveals his intent to betray Yhwach. He holds up the Sun Key and tells Ichigo to go. Uryu's entire plan was reworked from the manga. The Reishi collapse chips plotline from the manga is removed entirely, and we are given a completely new scheme for Uryu, which hasn't been revealed yet. This links back to Soken and Ryuken somehow. This was a massive divergence from the manga with enormous implications for Core 4. We saw the Bambis confronting Yhwach after dispatching the Soldad. This is a brutal scene where they attempt to attack a sleeping Yhwach only to be crushed by his passive spiritual pressure. A collapsed Lil Toto curses their luck as the 8 Vizards don their hollow masks and their captain coats to face Gerard. Isshin and Ryuken arrive in Varavelt through a Gate of the Sun using a decades-old sun key that Soken had taken with him when he was banished. Ryuken admits that it was the first time that he'd been grateful for his father's habit of taking things, and Isshin reminded him that speaking poorly of Soken was why Uryu also spoke poorly of Ryuken. That exchange was peak Bleach character writing, two fathers bonding by loss and heading into the same war that their sons are already fighting. Hitsugaya and Rangiku survey through Varavelt from above. Mairi sleeps in his preservation pod, and Hashwad's confrontation with Uryu reaches a critical point, when Hashwad claims that he could foresee their deaths. Uryu manifests his holy bow and states that the future can be changed. Hashwad was visibly agitated, not by the threat itself, but by the fact that Uryu was now filled with hope, something that Hashwad admitted that he hadn't foreseen. He then draws out his broadsword in silence as we cut to Yukio and Ridruka appearing at Kukakushiba's residence thanks to their Fullbring powers. They witness the Lil remnants raining down on the Serite as golden birds. The episode closes with a panoramic shot across the battlefield as we get glimpses of every remaining conflict. The post-credit scene was the Quincy Encyclopedia, a callback to the 2004 anime's comedic omake segments. It was hosted by Askin. He reveals new lore about Yhwach's original shoot starful from over 1,000 years ago. And this is how Cour 3 ended, way back at the end of 2024. Cour 3 wrapping up manga content at the midpoint of chapter 661, Cour 4 is being revealed to be titled The Calamity. It only has 25.5 manga chapters to cover across its 13-episode run. This is compared to the 50 to 67 chapters that each previous Cour adapted. So you can deduce that over 54% of the final Cour will be entirely new content that none of us have ever seen. Kubo himself stated on a TikTok live that fans will watch entire episodes and go, "I've never seen any of this before." Pierrot Films is essentially rewriting the narrative of Cour 4 from scratch, and this is exactly what this portion of the manga needs, because it was notoriously rushed due to Kubo's failing health. But yeah, for the rest of the video, we're going to go over the content that's going to be adapted in Cour 4 and my predictions for the final season of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. So if you don't want any spoilers, then this is the point where you need to click off the video. So warning out of the way, we're gonna start by talking about the Vizards versus Gerard Valkyrie. Things kick off right where Cour 3 left us. Hiyori, Love, Lisa and Hachi coordinate attacks against Gerard, but he shrugs off everything, establishing the terrifying scope of his abilities, while finally giving these characters something to do. The anime already had them activate hollow masks collectively in an anime exclusive Cour 3 scene. This opens the door for potential Bankai plus hollow mask combinations that we've never seen before. Love specifically is the only Vizard captain whose Bankai has never been revealed anywhere. Then there's Urahara and Yoruichi versus Askin. This is one of the most highly anticipated fights for Cour 4. Yoruichi unveils her God of Thunder form, altering her Reiatsu 48 times per second to overwhelm Askin's death dealing. Askin counters with his Volstandig, trapping both inside the Gift Ball Deluxe. This forces Urahara to finally reveal his Bankai Kanonbiraki Benihime Aratame. This restructures anything that it touches. He rebuilds his own destroyed eyes, fights Askin in close combat, and springs his Master Stroke, creating a path through the Gift Ball for Grimjow to rip out Askin's heart in his resurrection. Even in death, Askin's Gift Ball grows exponentially, incapacitating Urahara and Grimjow until Nell rescues them. We only learn that Nell rescues them from the Can't Fear Unworld light novels, so there's opportunity here to add this as anime exclusive footage. There's also the Urahara and Yoruichi backstory, which was revealed within the postscript of Can't Fear Unworld. Kubo has it fully written out, but he's never published it anywhere. So if there ever was a time to tell it, well, it's now in Cour 4. We then have Kenpachi, Hitsugaya and Byakuya collectively versus Gerard. This should be the most visually spectacular battle in Cour 4. Gerard's The Miracle converts damage into godly size and revives him from anything. Kenpachi unleashes Nozarashi, but Gerard's sword Hoffnung reflects blade damage back onto the attacker. Then Yachiru appears and triggers Kenpachi's Bankai, confirming that she is his Zanpakuto spirit. He transforms into something monstrous and cuts Gerard in half, but his body breaks down because it cannot contain his his own power. Hitsugaya's mature form then activates as he unleashes Shikai Hyoketsu to freeze Gerard at a molecular level. Byakuya joins with Ika Senjinka, but Gerard revives again anyway, as he only dies when Yhwach's Ashvalen drains him, betraying his own soldiers. Then there's Uryu vs Hashwad, which needs massive expansion since a lot of it occurred off-screen in the manga. The anime completely removes the Chips plotline from Uryu, replacing Uryu's plan with something tying back to the blood of Soken and his mother. This is a mystery that is still to be revealed. During this fight, Uryu showcases the antithesis, reversing injuries between targets, while Hashwad's The Balance redistributes misfortune back. When Dawn's Ashvalen strikes Hashwad, he makes an unexpectedly moving choice. He urges Uryu to transfer all of the wounds onto him, having realized Yhwach was acting on selfish desires rather than the Quincy's best interest. There's also Chad and Ganju, who hold off giant stone statues while Ichigo and Orihime advance towards Yhwach. This brief sequence within the manga is most likely going to be expanded, given that Core 3 already gave them some anime exclusive fight moments. The Fullbringers return when Tsukishima uses Book of the End to insert a false past where Tensei Zangetsu was never broken. This allows Orihime to reject the destruction that the Almighty had locked across every timeline. Core 3 plants the seed with Ruruka and Yukio arriving at the Shiba residence where Ginjo and Tsukishima had been training. The rematch between Ichigo vs Yhwach sees Ichigo absorb Yhwach's Quincy Reiatsu to trigger his Horn of Salvation form. This is devastating enough to force Yhwach into activating the Almighty, but the Almighty sets traps across multiple futures, and when Ichigo activates his true Bankai, Yhwach instantly breaks it in a turn of a page by selecting a future where it's already shattered. The anime needs to expand upon this dramatically, as fans have waited for years for the true Bankai of Ichigo to be revealed, only to then see it nerfed within a single page. As yet, we don't even know what the true power of Ichigo's Bankai even is. Then there's the matter of Aizen's confrontation with Yhwach when Yhwach leaves the royal palace and returns to the Serete. This scene is brought up by all fans, as it was only a handful of manga pages. Kyoka Suigetsu induces perfect hypnosis on someone wielding the Almighty, thus making Yhwach fight phantoms while Ichigo positions himself from behind for a devastating Getsuga Tensho. The anime must turn this into a proper battle sequence by giving Aizen and Yhwach a lot more dialogue and fleshing out their battle sequence. The finale sees Uryu fire the still silver arrowhead. This is extracted by Ryuken from his dead wife's heart. The arrowhead is fired through Yhwach's chest, momentarily disabling the Almighty. Ichigo then takes the opportunity to land the killing strike as his Bankai shell crumbles to reveal his original Shikai Zanpakuto underneath, and this is believed to be the true form of Ichigo's true Bankai. With this attack, Yhwach is defeated, and in the manga we have an epilogue which jumps 10 years into the future. Rukia's captain of the 13th Division now. Ichigo and Orihime have a son called Kazui, as well as Rukia and Renji having a daughter called Ichika. During this epilogue, Aizen also delivers his iconic speech on courage. What are my predictions for new content in Core 4? Well, I think there's a possibility that Isshin and Ryuken are going to get some original battle sequences. Some people are hoping for Isshin's Bankai to be revealed, and some people are hoping that Ryuken is finally going to engage in a battle for the first time in the series. Other aspects of new content will surely involve Uryu's rewritten plan to defeat Yhwach, the full Soul King history that the anime has been building across 3 cores, massive expansions of Aizen vs Yhwach, and Uryu vs Hashwad. We've already seen this in the teaser trailers that have been revealed, like the one from Jump Festa, and from the recent trailer from the 19th of May where we saw new Hashwad vs Uryu content. Also, I'd love for actual fight sequences with Ichigo's true Bankai. New footage involving Ginjo and Tsukishima taking part in battle. There's also hope for them to adapt the Hell Arc one-shot No Breathes from Hell, or possibly some teasers for Can't Be Your Own World, which is set 6 months after the defeat of Yhwach. With Kubo's direct involvement and supervision over everything, he's already set a precedent across the 3 cores of expanding content from the manga. Core 4 has every ingredient to transform the manga's rushed ending into the finale that Bleach always deserved. We've now finally reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. With over 54% of Core 4 consisting of content that no one has ever seen before, what are you most excited to see? Did you enjoy this complete recap of Cores 1 to 3 as well as what we can expect from Core Cour 4. If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. Hopefully you're all ready for Cour 4 when it airs in July, and lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next Bleach video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.